about? Maybe some money that he's going to spend.
Does it make any difference whether we know in advance or not? So, you know, again, what is interesting, like, you know, people talking about ending that war, people also talk about obviously ending what's happening in Gaza. We're going to be talking about that. The war zone in our own hospitals. We're going to be talking about
Unbelievable.
that. Lots more as well.
Excellent stuff. Julia Hartley-Brewer will be with you for the next 3 glorious hours. I'll be back with you tomorrow at 6 a.m. sharp. We'll see you then for more Morning Glory.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning to you and welcome to the show. Thank you very much indeed for your company. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer and this is Talk. We are the home of common sense, as you well know, if you've been listening to MG all morning. And whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, on your connected device, it is, as always, wonderful to have your company. And, of course, we, as always, have an awful lot to talk about, as you could not possibly have not noticed. Yesterday, of course, we saw Israel and Hamas apparently agreeing to a ceasefire to end 15 months of war. It starts this Sunday. Still to be agreed by the Israeli cabinet, but everyone seems to be pretty sure it's going ahead. And Joe Biden, of course, announcing it as well. Under the deal, which has 3 phases, hostages will be swapped for Hamas and Palestinian prisoners, and the IDF will eventually withdraw from Gaza. But is this a good deal? And if so, for whom? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. The incoming US President, Donald Trump, hailed the epic deal, claiming it could only have happened because of his election victory. He said, look, you get to sort this out. I need the hostages returned. All hell is going to break out. Meanwhile, Joe Biden claimed credit, saying it was down to many months of intensive diplomacy. And, of course, they want the first hostages out on Sunday. That's the day before Donald Trump is inaugurated. Also, back home, we're looking at, well, basically a war zone when it comes comes to our A&E units. A harrowing report from the Royal College of Nursing after a poll of nurses has revealed that an absolutely just horrifying array of stories of people kept on trolleys, patients unable to get treatment, and even patients dying and lying undiscovered for hours in A&E because staff are simply too overstretched to notice. Plus, I know this stuff doesn't matter in the big scheme of things compared to those big stories, but it kind of does, really does, doesn't it? Bafta have included what they call a transgender woman. What they actually mean is a trans-identified man as a nominee for leading actress. It's for the first time. Oh, well done them. They're so woke. Yet another prize for women that could be taken by a man. This is Talk. Welcome to the home of common sense. Welcome also, delighted to say, Conservative commentator Benedict Spencer. A very, very, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Always throws me when our guests are on different days than their usual days, because I'm now going to be convinced all day that it's Wednesday, but it's not.
We do this. We all collude to make sure that you keep you on your toes, make you think maybe you're losing your marbles. I am
losing my marbles. I am. Yes, exactly. No longer tired anymore. I don't get up at 4 anymore. It's fabulous. Thanks, Mike. Anyway, Benedict, so much to talk about at home and abroad. Let's start with abroad, though. Let's start with the Gaza ceasefire deal. And now, not 100% over the line yet. They're still arguing about one of the phases. There are 3 phases. We've had this sort of announcement from Joe Biden. I mean, look, the Qatari Prime Minister gets way too much credit, this guy. Hamas have agreed. We understand, we're going to get agreement from the Israeli cabinet. A majority would certainly agree, even if right-wing members do leave the cabinet, not expected. That deal can still go ahead. Starts with a complete ceasefire. I think we had 73 people killed in Gaza. Not in Israel. The only reason not in Israel is not because they're not firing rockets from Gaza, it's because they've got the defences. It doesn't mean that they're not also fighting. But a complete ceasefire starting on Sunday, the withdrawal of Israeli forces from populated areas of Gaza, and the release starting, we hope, on Sunday, that is their hope, of hostages including women and children under 19, the elderly over 50, and the injured or sick civilians. We're told that the first phase will be 33 civilians. Now, that should include the British-Israeli woman, Emily Damari. Also, we just hope they are still alive. There's a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old, Kafir and Ariel, who are still being held captive as well with their mother, Shiri. Palestinian civilians will be told they can return to their neighbourhoods, such as their homes still exist, and a massive surge in humanitarian aid. Phase 2, more than a month later, a permanent end to war in exchange for the release of the remaining living hostages. Israeli forces withdrawing from Gaza completely. A temporary ceasefire then becomes permanent. Phase 3, final remains of dead hostages to be returned to their families, so at least they can know for sure they are not being held captive still, and a major reconstruction plan for Gaza. So, question I'm asking this morning, is this a good deal?
No.
And is it for whom? Right, before we get... Well, you've heard your answer. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, text 87222. Get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs 1 standard network rate message. I looked at this yesterday, Benedict. I thought it was such as we know. This is a great deal for Hamas.
Yeah,
it's a terrible deal for Israel.
The Hamas get to survive. They get to live on another day. I think it's a curious thing. I think it's a political gesture by... It's not the Biden administration. It's Donald Trump. It's his incoming Middle East envoy, Stephen Witkoff, has been sort of doing the shuttle diplomacy, taking over from Antony Blinken. And by the sounds of it, frankly, putting the screws on Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israelis, which I think has caught the Israelis slightly off guard because they thought that the Trump administration was going to be much more amenable to them. I think short-term, that's because Trump needs a win. He needs to be able to say to the people he was able to take from the Democrats on the issue of Gaza, look, I can get this done.
I'm the peace president.
Yeah, I'm the guy that makes this stuff happen. I also think it's because there possibly isn't going to be a deal on Ukraine anywhere near as fast as the MAGA base would like there to be. So he needs to be able to say, look, I can get these things done, but this is a little bit more complex. You're going to have to help me out with this. But I also think... If this is a case of the Republican Party putting the screws on the Israeli right, this is not going to have the intended effect that many people on the pro-Gaza side would like. This is going to force Israeli politics further to the right, because not just Netanyahu, but his coalition partners, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, they will look at this and say, they will say, these people are not our friends, and we need to further decouple ourselves. Joe Biden had a lot of trouble over the last couple of years trying to put pressure on the Israeli government, because the Israelis have recognized the direction of travel in the US. They need it to be less dependent on the US. And what the Israeli right will now say is, well, we need to be even less dependent on the US. We cannot have it that a Republican president can do this to us.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, again, I think, there's been a lot of very strong military support in the end from the West, from, the moments when Iran attacked Israel, that support was there. But so much when it comes to the words, we have not seen either America under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and we've certainly not seen under our prime ministers here, certainly under Keir Starmer, strong enough language supporting Israel, no matter what. The sort of support that we gave America when they suffered 9/11, and support we gave in the Afghanistan war. For all its faults, Afghanistan, it was perfectly justified to go in and take out the Taliban, who were supporting, basically allowing Al-Qaeda to train and live there freely. Now, it seems to me this. If I've always said this, if it was my family member who was held hostage, 100%, I'll take any deal. Give up a million people in Gaza. Give up. I don't care. I want my child back. End of. Nothing to discuss. That is why hostage families. That's the reason why hostage families don't do this. We've had a policy in the West that we don't negotiate with hostages. Sorry, with terrorists. We don't pay ransoms. Okay, we say that often. It does actually happen. But here's the thing: we didn't negotiate with Al-Qaeda. We didn't negotiate with the Taliban. We didn't negotiate with ISIS. We went in and destroyed them. I was delighted to hear that, Defence Secretary appointee Mario Ruby, the Secretary of State appointee for Donald Trump, both fully. We want the full destruction of Hamas, which is the only moral viewpoint to take. They are terrorists. They are a danger to their own people and to the people of Israel. Oh, by the way, and us, everyone in the West, everybody, including completely ordinary, moderate Muslims going about their peaceful daily lives. So allowing Hamas to basically rebuild, we're going to get aid in, reconstruction in. Where do you think that money's going to go? It's going to go to Hamas. The idea that we're going to have some sort of moderate Palestinian authority in charge. There isn't a moderate. There are more or less extreme organisations. They all believe in the destruction of Israel. Lots of talk about a two-state solution. Well, Israel has offered a two-state solution many, many times. It's been on the cards. The international bodies have all, have negotiated for it. The people who don't want a two-state solution are pretty much every organisation involved with the Palestinians who want a one-state solution, and that one state doesn't include Israel. I don't know where this goes from here. Look, let's get these hostages home. Let's get these babies home. Let's get these young women home. God knows what's been happening to them. I'm afraid we do know what's been happening to them. It is horrific. Yes, let's get aid to people who are desperate, innocent people in Gaza who are desperate. But at the end of the day, we just start again. Gaza, Hamas said they wanted to commit October the 7th again, the day after.
The war's not over. There's a lot, on all the front pages, there's a lot of sort of self-congratulations. This is literally just a 6-week pause. There's no guarantee that the next phases will come through. There's no guarantee that this will even last. And I don't think it's acceptable to many in Israel for Hamas to continue to exist. But we also have to remember it's not really acceptable for a lot of the people outside of Israel in the rest of the Middle East as well. There talk about security guarantees being provided by Egypt and of a massive rebuilding project, and that means money, and where will that come from? The Gulf states. But there will need to be security guarantees for that money to come in the first place, which is that Hamas is not left in charge. And, we're talking here about it potentially going back into the hands of Hamas. That, you're not going to get the GCC saying, yes, we'll greenlight billions in rebuilding if it goes straight to an ally of Iran. That's not actually going to happen. So it's not even in their interest. As much as they need to, put out a public face for their own civilian populations and say, yes, of course, we champion the Palestinian cause, these people do not want Hamas to be in charge. Israel would not have done what it's done if it hadn't had the sotto voce green light from other capitals around the Gulf. And, it's not as if any of them, having signed the Abraham Accords, it's not like any of those said, well, we're going to withdraw our ambassadors. There was no talk about the Egyptians or the Jordanians going into Israel. It's not a thing anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Egyptian, again, everyone thought, it's outrageous that you people can't leave Gaza. Yeah, the Egyptian borders, they've got stronger protections on their border than the Israelis do. It is extreme. I want to hear from you. Whose side? Well, not whose side you're on. Everyone should be on the side of innocent people not getting killed. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know how anyone could be. I genuinely don't know how you can morally not be on Israel's side. I really, really don't. Israel destroying Hamas is for the benefit of the Palestinian people. They've not destroyed Hamas. Again, a lot of talk people, I mean, yeah, BBC had their usual sort of, tens and tens and tens of thousands of people being killed. Yeah, well, probably 20,000 of those are Hamas fighters. Glad they're dead. I would happily shoot them dead myself. I'd be doing the world a good deed. I don't understand why people find this complicated. Not a single child in Gaza would have died. Not a single child would have died if October the 7th hadn't been launched and if Hamas fighters did not hide themselves in schools, in hospitals, build tunnels under apartment buildings and quite deliberately use innocent men, women and children, but particularly children, as their human shields. And by the way, they've got a tunnel network bigger than the London Tube. If they wanted to keep all those children safe, they could have them in the tunnels, but they don't. The only children that have been in the tunnels are either their own children or the hostage children taken from Israel. So I'm sorry. I'm very, very sad for the loss of life. It's all on Hamas. It's as simple as that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. We've got lots of great guests on this later in the show. Also going to play that clip of Joe Biden last night, who apparently thinks that it was Hezbollah who committed the massacres on October the 7th. I mean, the idea that Joe Biden was closely involved in these negotiations is for the birds, isn't it? Let's also talk about war zones here. Our NHS A&E corridors. I've had the misfortune of having to attend A&E in the last year, and it was just incredibly slow, but not water. My main takeaway was, does anyone here speak English? I mean, I genuinely was really quite stunned, but does anyone here speak English as a first language? I mean,
No.
I know we've got a lot of people working from abroad in the NHS. Well, great, but maybe we wouldn't need so many if we didn't have quite so many people here who I just thought it was. I just thought it was quite bizarre. I've also had two family members in the last couple of years who one stuck on couldn't get an ambulance with a broken pelvis, 6'5", having had a back accident, being kept on a trolley for 24 hours in absolute agony, not treated. Can I point out that a pelvic break has a 20% chance of death because of chance of fractures getting into your bloodstream and it's incredibly serious. Left in a corridor for 24 hours. But also another elderly relative in their 70s with facing heart and breathing problems, stuck in an ambulance for some 4 hours outside A&E, unable to get in. It's real. It's absolutely happening. This report from the Royal College of Nursing, hundreds of pages long, 5,000 nurses polled, telling their experiences, talking about, patients just routinely in corridors, blocking fire exits, women forced to go through miscarriages in a corridor, no privacy, with a drunk vomiting and shouting abuse just sort of next to them. Patients dying, no one notices, no time to deal with the dead patient's body because you're so frazzled. Nurses dealing with up to 40 patients in one responsibility for them in one go. It's untenable. It's untenable. What do we do to fix it, though?
I mean, what do you do to fix it?
More money! More money! Isn't that the answer?
More money thrown on the bonfire, but also, by the way, we're not going to, sort of reduce migration numbers. We're not going to train any more doctors and nurses. We're just going to give NHS managers more money to do what? I'm not entirely sure. I'm sort of resigned to this, is the thing. This is just us now. This was not unforeseen. We've been told for years, if you continue to import hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, and you do not increase capacity, if the population continues to age at the current pace and you do not increase capacity, if you do not train more doctors and nurses and you underpay them so that they then go overseas because they can all read and speak English and they can tell what they're paid in Australia and Canada, that this is going to lead to a major bottleneck, which is what we've got. Yeah. And it's not simply about saying the NHS is underfunded. Well, perhaps it is, perhaps it isn't. But there are far more fundamental things here, which is that the system as it currently is was not built for the sheer volume of people. Yeah. And I'm sorry, lots of people will say that things like migration are a secondary issue. No, people do recognise that this is one of the few, if not the only places in the world where you can just rock up and they'll treat you really for free. Yeah. I'm sorry, I wouldn't
expect to get free healthcare anywhere. I always have full travel insurance. I don't think anyone should be allowed in the country without travel insurance. And everyone will say, well, people can't afford it. I'm not sure we want those people coming to visit. I think if you can't afford 50 quid or 30 quid for some health insurance while you're here, I'm not sure you're going to be a big spender.
I've just got to be honest. I'm using this word a lot, half-wit, but that is the attitude that we take to policy in this country. It is as if it has been dreamed up by somebody who is not all there. They cannot get from point A to point B and see the issues that might be there. They just think, oh, immigration means GDP go up. Fantastic
but
news.
also our health service can't survive with that. But it's funny because every other sodding health service in the world manages to survive without having, with foreign doctors and foreign nurses. I've got no issue with. I've had plenty of doctors and nurses over the years who have come from other countries. I feel very strongly about the training being verified. There are lots of question marks over training in India, by the way.
Oh, huge.
Massive scam in terms of how you can get in, how you can, I would say it's fascinating. Reuters, that far-right blog, Reuters reported a few years back that 1 in 4 doctors practising in India as doctors have not got a medical degree. Okay, so, but we import lots of our doctors from India. But one of the crucial things is the language barrier, and it is a very, very big issue. This is, it's like the whole, what we can do. Genuinely, doctors' training has extra training for doctors who are dyslexic. I'm really sorry you're dyslexic. I'm not sure that you being dyslexic and you being a doctor works for me.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The sheer number of medical malpractice, doctors and nurses being struck off because of medical malpractice, the disproportionate numbers who are overseas
75%.
Huge.
75%.
Why on earth are we sitting there saying that this is an acceptable thing? But there's also a moral component to this. I'm sorry, and this is the thing that really winds me up. There are more Ghanaian medics working in the NHS than there are medics in Ghana. That is morally unacceptable. You cannot take doctors and nurses trained by a third world country, which has much worse healthcare outcomes, and say, oh, great, we'll have those, thanks very much. That is human capital strip mining. It is morally unacceptable. Just pay your own doctors and nurses, train enough of them, so you don't have to nick those from the third world.
We literally limit the number that we train in this country. Right now, there are a whole bunch of kids at school who are predicting a load of straight A's in maths and sciences. And they're not getting offers to study medicine at university because their fees are only $9.5 grand. But there are loads and loads of kids from China and India and Nigeria and elsewhere, and they will be getting offers to study medicine at our universities because they're going to pay 30 grand a year. It's really that simple.
Morally bankrupt.
Exactly. I want to hear from you on this. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000, text 87222, get in touch on X at Talk TV. That was harrowing report. What is your reaction? I mean, the idea that our services, as our bed occupancy in our hospitals, 96%. Now, in most hospitals in Europe, it's around 80%. It's around 80%.
Somebody at the Treasury will be very clever and say, but that means that we're sort of constantly not overspending. And you just think...
No, it's just not how it works. They don't, absolutely. Can I ask you also about front page of The Sun today? This is about a rapper on BBC is Jimmy's killer. We all remember back, it's way back now, 2008, the murder of a 16-year-old schoolboy, the gentle giant Jimmy Mizzen. The man who was convicted of his murder is, clearly not remorseful. He served his time in prison, yes, to be fair, minimum of 14 years, but he is now a drill rapper. Drill rappers, for the elderly at the back. No, it's not my music either. Who am I kidding? But basically, they're the guys who are like celebrating violence, glorifying gangs, stabbing, having your gun. The lyrics are all about and we know that there are actually murders that happen on our street, stabbings that happen on our street because one drill rapper from one gang says this, one says another. Look, the lad that was murdered on the school bus only the other day, he was one of these sort of grime drill rappers, as a young 14-year-old lad, and three arrests have now been made. But that lad was, had been carrying a machete into school. He had a string of offences himself. He'd been in care. He'd been living on the streets. I mean, there's a lot of victimhood and danger in these people. Yeah. But the BBC. They're sort of, they're BBC One Extra, Radio 1 Extra, which is basically urban code.
Unlistenable.
For you and me. It's not aimed at us, but basically they absolutely celebrate this and glorify this kind of music. They've been playing this guy. He wears a balaclava. I wonder why he's wearing a balaclava. Doesn't want to be identified. I wonder why. Yeah, because he's a convicted killer.
That's because he's an Irish Republican.
His lyrics, I have to say, his lyrics are actually very clever. They're actually very... the lyrics, as poetry, are actually very good. But they're about glorifying murder. Glorifying the murder he committed. The BBC censors people all the time. Oh, you can't say that. No, trans woman isn't a man. Climate deniers. I mean, remember Frankie Goes to Hollywood and Relax? I mean, you know what I mean? There's censorship all the time from the BBC, but happy to play drill rap from a murderer celebrating the murder he committed of a 16-year-old innocent boy.
Yeah, baby, it's cold outside. No, I'm going to shoot you in the head and then stab your associates. Oh, that's completely acceptable. And it's gritty and it's urban and it's up and coming and the person has quite a high IQ. Therefore, we should glorify. I'm sorry, this is... once upon a time, we weren't allowed to listen to rock and roll because it might corrupt the youth. Now
we see Elvis Presley's pelvis.
Now the taxpayer has to foot up this stuff, actually has to, pay for it. And otherwise, you're not allowed to listen to other people's output.
We're both strong advocates of freedom of speech, but you're actually not allowed to profit from your crimes.
I've got nothing wrong with people actually rapping about things. You say that it's very, it's very clever. A lot of it is, but there's no question that it's also fomenting a culture beyond it. If they were just talking about things and it was about artistic ideals, fine. But people do get stabbed in gang wars between different drill rappers, and then they rap about it. Often, funnily enough, in prison. They record it on, I don't know what they're recording it on, but they are. They send it out and it gets put out. It is mind-blowing. It's a culture, and it's not the music that's necessarily the issue, it's the gang culture around it.
Question. If it were young white boys...
It would be incredibly embarrassing if young white boys were doing this.
If young white boys were doing this, they wouldn't be playing that music, they wouldn't be celebrating it, they'd be criticising it.
Of course they would.
The rules are different.
Of course they would. Although, I'm telling you right now, it's probably young, white, middle-class, public-educated people at the BBC who are making the decisions to put this stuff on air.
Almost without doubt. Benedict Spence, thank you very much. Love to hear your thoughts on that. As always, phone lines open, 0344 499 1000. In particular, I do want to hear from you on what's going on in our A&E corridors. I mean, what's happened to you? Tell me your family experience. If you work in healthcare, I want to hear from you. The war zone that is. And a war zone we hope to see ended in Gaza and the return of hostages with that Israel-Gaza ceasefire. But is it a good deal? And if so, for whom? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
corruption scandal, not of her making, but in the family. Her aunt was the leader of Bangladesh.
And there was definitely some connection to Tulip.
Even if it was the house she lived in.
There was that, I think she was involved in some way in a deal done with Russia back in 2013, done with Vladimir Putin to build a nuclear reactor in Bangladesh.
Yep.
And she was pictured with her aunt and Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. 10:28 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk. Benedict Spence also with me. Just some breaking news. It won't come as a surprise to anybody. Yesterday, 4 small boats arrived with Channel migrants on in the UK. Should we just guess the number? Should we just play that game? Should we just play that game every day? Just start that game. I can go higher, lower. How many Channel migrants do you think arrived on 4 small boats yesterday? Bearing in mind, it's January. We've got cold weather. It's probably not very good.
42.
Higher.
Higher. 72.
Higher.
Oh, 102.
Higher.
All right, these are rather large boats. 142.
Higher.
Good Lord.
We can do this all.
202.
Higher.
What?
Yeah, 215.
215.
Should we do that? Should we have a daily game? We'll just do that. How many Channel migrants arrived in the UK on 4 small boats yesterday? Takes the total number of migrants to arrive this year to 603. Bearing in mind that in total, since Keir Starmer's become Prime Minister and he smashed the gangs. Remember that? Remember when that happened? I remember talking about it on the show. 23,845 more migrants have arrived.
Huzzah.
Again, should we have another little round of applause? We like to do this regularly. Little round of applause for Keir Starmer and all his many achievements. Yeah, there we are. Anyway, so much more I want to talk to you about today, but we'll get to a lot more of it. I want to hear your thoughts as well. 0344 499 1000 on everything we're talking about. War zones in Middle East, also war zones in our own NHS hospitals with this extraordinary Royal College of Nursing report. Do get in touch on either of those topics or anything else you want to talk about. Let's go straight to the phone lines. Peter is on the line in London and wants to talk about that ceasefire deal. Very good morning to you, Peter.
Good morning, Julia.
Good
morning, Ben. Happy New Year.
Don't encourage him.
Happy New Year. Yeah, I mean, you can't trust these animals, can you, Hamas? I mean, they're starting to renege on those last-minute issues. Netanyahu doesn't trust them. Why can't they release all the hostages in one go? I mean,
I'm going to throw this out here. They could have released them all already, or they could have not taken hostages in the first place. I mean, no one forced them to do that.
No.
Whenever anyone argues with me, and I get the usual, oh, God, I mean, I always know I'm in the right when I get the level of abuse that I get online, and I care not a jot, by the way. So keep it coming, folks. I don't care. But you're just proving how right I am, I always think, when they do that. But it's just, I always just say, have they tried releasing the hostages and surrendering and basically, relenting on their plan to basically destroy Israel and kill every Jew? Maybe they'll find that their own children and innocent women and men might have happier lives.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, and these Palestinian, I don't want to be insulting, but they are backward people. I mean,
there's no backward people. It's a culture that is, I think, backward.
Yeah. I mean, all they live for is basically just to hate Israel, don't they?
That appears to be the situation. I mean, I would love to know how many people in Gaza in particular genuinely do support Hamas. The polling suggests they do. Would people feel safe to say they didn't support Hamas? But when you see those videos filmed by Hamas of people, men, women and children, cheering in the street, spitting on the Israeli women hostages being ridden past them, clearly bruised and battered and bleeding, clearly have been, blood in their genital area, clearly they've been raped, for God's sake, and they're cheering and spitting on those women. That doesn't suggest to me that if Hamas were gone tomorrow, that this would be a peace-loving place.
No, all they want is, all the Gaza people want is a one-state solution. And if it wasn't, Mike Parry said it yesterday, didn't he? He said if they got their act together, if they were clever people, Beirut would be, Gaza would be another Beirut.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, Beirut was probably looking better a little while ago before, of course, some bombing to try and get rid of the Hezbollah agents. But, exactly. They could be doing really well. There's going to be billions in aid going in, reconstruction, rebuilding, and we know perfectly well who's going to take most of that money. It's going to be the terrorists.
Sad, isn't it?
I know, it is. It really is sad. It really is sad. But you think this is a bad deal for Israel?
Oh, awful, yeah, awful.
If it was your family member, I mean, there's a British Israeli woman, Emily Damari, a 28-year-old woman, there are kids, a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old. I mean, would you Would you want them to do the deal?
I don't know. Well, I'm a half Jewish. My granddad was Jewish. So, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? But I'd say release them all, basically.
Well,
release them all in one go.
Exactly. And again, what's so awful is they're going to be exchanging live, long-serving Palestinian terrorists from Israeli prisons in return for dead bodies. Some of these are going to be dead bodies, which is just extraordinary. Appreciate your call, Peter. Thank you. Let's go to Ray. He's in North Wales. Hello, Ray.
Oh, hi there, Julia.
Hi. What do you think about this deal?
Call. Oh, well, for me, I don't think a deal is ever ideal to anybody, but I think this is about the best Israel can get out of it. Now, why I say so is because, I mean, the war has been going on for 15 months. Hamas is an ideology. It's not something that can be defeated. It's been shown over and over again by all the wars that the U.S. has fought, the U.S. and all the allies have fought. You can't defeat an ideology.
Ray, I'm so sorry. There's an awful lot of background noise or something being moved at the same time. Can we just try and get a clearer line? Sorry.
Okay, yeah. Oh.
Is that
any better now?
That's better, yes. Thank you.
Okay, oh, great, yeah. So, as I was saying, I don't think Israel can get any best out of this deal. This is about the best. Hamas is an ideology. It's not something that can be defeated. It's been shown over and over again. The U.S., with all their wars they've fought, they've not been able to defeat those things. You can't. You just kill them. New ones will sprung up. That's just how it is. So
but that doesn't stop the West going for Al-Qaeda or going for ISIS. We don't say let's negotiate with them, do we? We just say let's go and kill as many of them as possible, and then we'll wait for them to grow again, and then we'll go in and kill them again.
And kill them, and you just continue killing. And don't forget, you're not just killing them, they're also killing you as well. Israel has lost over 200 soldiers in what they are doing, and also killing some of the hostages that have died. So what are we hoping to achieve? Just keep having piles of dead body? You just can't defeat those ideologies.
So what's the alternative?
So what I'm saying is Israel has fought this war for 15 months. Going to get this deal and get the remaining living hostages there is just about the best it can be. Continuing this war is killing people and just killing more children and showing gory sights that no one should see.
I think it's about preventing Hamas doing another October the 7th, which I think they're going to do, and they're certainly going to try to do. Ray, appreciate your call. Thank you very much indeed. We're going to take a quick break now, and then we're going to be talking to an international fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv. That's Dr. Casey Gab. That's up next. Stay tuned. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, On your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Benedict Spence still with us. Delighted to be joined right now by Dr. Casey Babb. He's an international fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv. Casey, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I've been reading your work and a lot of the tweets you've been writing recently about this, and talking about how, if Sunday comes and we do actually get that ceasefire deal, we've got Benjamin Netanyahu now. He's delayed that cabinet meeting where he's expecting his cabinet to agree this deal. He's now accusing Hamas of trying to sort of backtrack on sort of earlier understanding of the deal. So we'll see what happens there. But you've been talking about how even when we do start seeing hostages returning, what a sort of day of reckoning that will be, and actually that isn't the end so much as the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is going to be a very painful, very revealing time for a lot of people. A lot of people around the world, not just Jews, but civilized, decent people around the world who have been watching this for many, many months. This hostage release, this sort of negotiation, if we get there, we're going to find things out that are going to be traumatizing, and which are going to make, in my opinion, possibly a phase 2 and a phase 3 of this deal harder and possibly even more unpalatable than the first.
Well, indeed. I mean, this is a very long process. 6 weeks for the first phase. I'm only seeing 33 hostages coming out, the children, the elderly, women. And we don't even know if all of the people that we know, we've got the names of, we've got the photographs, and we know that were taken and are yet unaccounted for. Their bodies haven't been identified. They haven't been announced as dead by Hamas. We just don't even know if they're alive or what state they're in. And they include a British Israeli woman, Emily Damari, just 28 years old, but also, I mean, a baby and a toddler, Kfir and Ariel. I mean, it is astonishing, that we literally have no idea whether they are with their mother, Shiri, or whether they have died and what conditions they've been kept in.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it. It's astonishing. But what's even more astounding to me, Julia, is the fact that this has gone on for over 450 days. And I don't just look at this as, a situation between Israel and Hamas. I look at this as a failure of the Western world. I mean, whether you love Donald Trump or you hate him, on October 7th or October 8th, if the president of the United States had come out and said there will be hell to pay, I think there would be more answers now than we have. There would be more clarity now, and probably more hostages would be alive. This has been a failure that, is unprecedented, and it's really a horrible situation. And
Israel has had a lot of Western support, but again, a lot of it is, again, the right words have been said at times, but then withdrawn. And of course, we've seen that pressure on the Democrats, from left wings and the part of the kafir-wearing classes, which has really undermined a lot of that support for Israel and that clear message. Do you think it was really significant that, and Donald Trump obviously is claiming this, that, it's Donald Trump saying all hell's going to break out if hostages are not starting to be released by the time I'm inaugurated on Monday? We know there's pressure from the Biden administration. They desperately, we're in Jimmy Carter, days, aren't we, in the Iran hostages, in terms of wanting to get a hostage out while he is still in office himself. I mean, there's a lot of domestic politics going on there. But one thing that Benjamin Netanyahu has always been at pains to say, and I have to say I disagree with him on many things, but on this I think he is spot on. Israel is fighting an existential war, not just for the Israeli people, but for the Jewish people, but also for Western civilization against this threat from Islamist extremism and ideology. And I just don't think many people in the West have really woken up to that yet.
100%, which I don't understand. I mean, Israel, I look at Israel, I look at the IDF as the world's sort of commando unit against the fight against radical Islam. And people have short memories, right? Here in Canada, the UK, the US, all over the world, there's a lot of victims of terrorism. And those people were killed by individuals who have the same mentality, the same sort of self-decapitating death cult mentality of Hamas. They're killed by the same people. Our people are victims of terrorism, just like the people of Israel. And for some people, for some reason, we've allowed, the pro-Hamas crowd to overrun our cities, to do things in our streets that, years ago, I don't think we would have dreamt of this. So people need to wake up and realize that this whole situation, this threat environment is not contained to Israel or to that region. If we don't wake up and start getting real and start cracking down on this stuff and on these people, there's going to be more blood in our streets.
And this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, and the question we're asking our audience today, is this a good deal and for who? Look, at any point, Hamas could have released all the hostages. At any point, they could have not taken the hostages in the first place. Small point worth making. If they hadn't gone in on October the 7th, none of this would have happened. Not a single Palestinian child would have died in any IDF bombing. It just simply wouldn't have happened. If they didn't hide their militants and their munitions in schools and hospitals, in refugee camps and apartment buildings, no innocent people would have died either. If they'd hidden them in the tunnels, no innocent people would have died. These are all choices Hamas has made, supposedly on behalf of the Palestinian people. Is this a good deal for Hamas? Is this a good deal for Israel?
It's really tough to say, Julia. On the Israeli side, I think this is probably the least bad option given the circumstances right now for Israel. And it pains me to say that, given what Israel is going to have to give up to get these hostages dead and alive back. It's disgusting. I
mean, these prisoners, some of the prisoners being released, are terrorists, people serving life sentences for murder.
100%.
I mean, bearing in mind that the man who masterminded the Hamas attack on October the 7th, Yahya Sinwar, he was released years back in a previous prisoner and hostage exchange.
100%. But this sort of speaks to the fact that the Israelis, they value life over death. They value the future rather than the past, unlike the Palestinians, who have been trying to go back 100 years, every single day, day in and day out. At every opportunity, they're looking for a do-over. They're looking for, as one of your previous callers said, a one-state solution. And again, people need to wake up to that. So on the Israeli side, look, it's a win that they're getting people back. It's coming too late. There should be a heck of a lot more people coming back than what's going to be happening here, hopefully, on Sunday. And for Hamas, it's really not a great deal. Contrary to popular belief, they've been decimated. Hezbollah has been decimated. The region, thanks to Israel, has gone through this wildly transformative period. Lebanon is a different country now. The West Bank is starting to be different. Gaza looks like an ashtray in most places. Hamas is hanging on for dear life, which is in part why they struck a deal.
Yeah, but except Antony Blinken, the US outgoing Secretary of State, said that Hamas have just recruited, the 20,000 fighters who've been killed by the IDF, they've just replaced them.
Yeah. And that may very well be true, but Israel has plenty of bombs and plenty of munitions to deal with these people. Okay. And this isn't the end of the war. This is not the end of the war. It might be a pause in the battle. This war is going to rage on. And Israel and Bibi and, whoever comes after Bibi, this fight's going to carry on. And if I'm Hamas, I feel very vulnerable right now. This is not a win. Only the Palestinians would have the audacity to say that there's been a genocide for 15 months and then turn around without any sympathy, without any regret, and say, hey, we won. Well, between 40 and 50,000 dead, I mean, maybe that's a win to the Palestinians, but you wouldn't hear that from any group of people, any other group of people.
Very interesting, if that is the true number indeed. Dr. Casey Goat-Bab, International Fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, really appreciate you joining us. Just a quick word from you, Benedict. I mean, just in terms of Benjamin Netanyahu is claiming that Hamas is trying to backtrack on the earlier understanding. He says that Hamas are now wanting to basically backtracking on an agreement that gave Israel the ability to veto the release of certain Palestinian prisoners. He's saying they will not back down and the Israeli cabinet will not meet until that is agreed by Hamas.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. I think Hamas is possibly sensing an opportunity to get one over, basically, on Israel, and especially if the Trump administration is putting a lot of pressure on Israel. It thinks it has a rare window, and I'm not surprised that Netanyahu might not be particularly amenable to that.
No, indeed. At 10:48 is the time. Love to hear your thoughts on this. Give us a call 0344 499 1000. Up next, we're going to be talking about a man, trans-identified, yes, but a man who has been nominated in the Best Actress category for a Bafta. Yet another man attempted to win prizes that belong to women. We're going to be talking to the brilliant writer and author and campaigner on all these issues, Graham Linehan. He's up next. This is Talk.
Changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. What a beautiful name. The Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, Canada and the United States, that would really be something. All hell will break out in the Middle East, and it will not be good for Hamas, and it will not be good, frankly, for anyone.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 10:51 is the time. Some breaking news for you. Remember the suspended Labour MP Mike Amesbury? He was involved in what we call an altercation with a man in Cheshire in the early hours of October. He was charged with common assault by Cheshire Police in November. He has appeared at Chester Magistrates Court and basically he has pleaded guilty to assault by beating after punching the man in the street. That means there will be now definitely going to be a by-election in the Runcorn and Helsby constituency. Now, he has a majority of 14,700. Reform UK came second at the election with 7,600. We know that's one of their target seats, so it could be a very interesting first test of how well Reform really are doing if they could take that seat. We'll talk about that, no doubt, later in the show. Right now, let's turn our attention to the Baftas. Don't normally spend much time dealing with these things. They nominate people for a load of films that I've never even seen and have no intention of seeing. frankly, most people haven't seen a lot of them. But this time round, it caught my interest because Spanish performer Carla Sofia Gascon, aged 52, has been nominated in the leading actress category for performance in the Mexican musical comedy Emilia Perez. It's a film about a cartel boss who transitions from being a man to a trans woman to escape vengeful criminals. The only issue I've got with this, I've not seen the film, I don't know the actor, is that it's the actress category. And Carla Sofia Gascon is a man. He lives as a trans-identified man. You would know him as a trans woman. He's been referred to as she throughout all the articles, whether it's Pink News or GB News or anyone else, The Telegraph. But he's a man. So what's a man doing in a woman's category? Let's talk about this with Graham Linehan, who's a writer and author who has been a fantastic advocate for women's rights on this issue. Very good morning to you, Graham.
Morning.
I mean, we're told, oh, it's the first time making history. Isn't it wonderful? Oh, isn't it wonderful? Basically, you've got, a trans-identified man playing the character of a trans-identified man. Oh, whoopee, oh, well done. It's all very woke and wonderful, representing the community, etc., etc. Basically, this is a category for women who work as actors, and a man has been nominated for a woman's prize. How does that work?
Well, there's a saying that trans activists are fond of deploying, which goes something along the lines of rights aren't pie. If someone takes some, there's still going to be left for you. But this proves very, very clearly that rights are pie. And this man has taken one big slice of the women's category.
Yeah, there's only a certain number of nominees, 4, 5, 6, whatever it is, and he's one of them.
Yes, exactly. As you can see, there's 3 women there, 1 man. So that means that 1 woman has lost her chance to advance her career, to receive an award. I think that the Baftas are probably well regarded in the US because US actors are very well, or UK actors are very well regarded. And the crime about all this is that when he wins, because he will win, because the entertainment establishment is nothing if not craven and virtue signaling at all times. The other actresses, I guarantee you, will stand up. Will give him a standing ovation when he wins.
Yes.
Because it's none of these people in their gated communities and their incredible fees they get from being in films, they will never have to use a women's shelter. They will never have to use a rape crisis center. It doesn't really matter if the toilets in the Groucho Club are non-binary, because that's a very rarefied atmosphere.
Yeah.
But when the toilets in a rape crisis shelter are, not non-binary, unisex, then that means a very different thing,
Yeah.
And when rape crisis groups, for instance, have a man there saying he's a woman, that is incredibly significant.
But it's amazing, isn't it? How often you get, the great and the good. They're so concerned. They're so concerned about Me Too, but not so concerned about, an actress getting her bum slapped by a director or something, but not so concerned about grooming gangs. They're so concerned about number of women in boardrooms, but they're not concerned about whether or not a woman is being punched in the face by a man who is boxer and is claiming to be a woman. It is extraordinary, the stuff they claim to care about. But this is just really, really simple. If they want to have a category, and they've done this, some of the award ceremonies have done this, haven't they, where they go, we're going to have, categories, they're unisex, they're not, they're not actresses, not actors, but all unisex. And we know what happens then, invariably. It's just all men that win it. There was a reason why they brought in these categories. There's a reason why there is women's sport. It's because otherwise women's book, awards. It's because women wouldn't win these things. And then you have a women's category, and then you allow a man to win. I mean, we've seen, so many awards, best sports person, best sportswoman, going to men. Clearly, you just have to look at this actor. He's clearly a man. I do think part of the problem is, though, and I've done this for years, and I'm stopping doing it, we stop using this term trans women, because don't allow, there's no subset of women. He's a trans-identified man. He can wear what he wants, he can call himself what he wants, but he's a man, his pronouns are he and him, and he is not allowed to be in a woman's category.
Absolutely. And, there's a website everyone should visit called She Won that lists all the female athletes who've lost out to males entering women's sports. Have a look at that and see the absolute devastation that has happened to women's sports over the last few years. And also, you know, look at the guy. He's a head height taller than everybody else. You know, it's such a ridiculous display. And one very important thing to mention. That many people, I think, still don't know about, which is that 88%, I think that's the number, it's around there, but 88% of males who claim a trans identity have not had any surgery. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that would make a difference, but I'm just saying that if you want to win awards, women's prizes, anything you want at the moment, all you have to do is have a brass neck and a wig. Yeah. Those are the two things that will get you into any space that you want.
You can still have your tackle. I mean, you know, we see that with Leah Thomas, you know, average male swimmer. Oh, funnily enough, he pretends to be a woman. Suddenly, with his swinging his bits quite happily, nakedly in the changing room where the women are, quite happily. No, then funnily, he wins. Oh, what? A really tall man with really strong shoulders and long legs and big limbs and you know, all the benefits of testosterone and bigger lung power, bigger hands. Oh, what a surprise he beats women. It is extraordinary. I'm amazed that so many people are not angry about these things. And we can say, look, you know, we've got Gaza going on, we've got people dying in hospital wards. Does this matter as much as that? No, it doesn't. But it still matters. And it's about reality, and it's about language, and it's about truth, it's about facts, and it's about protecting women and allowing women to win the stuff they're entitled to win. Graham, you've been such an amazing advocate on this. If every other man had done what you've done, none of this would have been allowed to happen. So thank you for that. I really do appreciate that, and I appreciate you joining us today as well. I'll get Benedict Spence's thoughts on all of this coming up. We're also going to talk more about Gaza, more about the NHS, drill rappers. Oh, yeah, and Starmer in Kiev. About time, mate. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. It's just gone 11 o'clock, and whether you are listening on DAB Plus Radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it's, as always, great to have your company. If you've just tuned in, you've missed a belter of a first hour. Benedict Spence is still with us, Conservative commentator, and lots to talk about. Coming up in this hour, more on the ceasefire deal we're told was agreed by Israel and Hamas, yet to be formalised because it hasn't been agreed by the Israeli cabinet. That meeting has been delayed with Benjamin Netanyahu now accusing Hamas of trying to renege on some of the early agreements in the deal, particularly having a veto, Israel having a veto on who the violent criminals, many of them, are released from Israel prisons in return for some of those hostages. So we'll be talking more about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think it's a good deal? And if so, for who? Also, we've got war zone here in our NHS. A harrowing report from the Royal College of Nursing has revealed that things are so bad that dead patients are lying undiscovered for hours in A&E on hospital trolleys in corridors because NHS staff are too overstretched to even notice them. And a balaclava-clad rapper who boasts about killing and is promoted by BBC DJs has been unmasked as the murderer of 16-year-old schoolboy Jimmy Misen. I mean, absolutely extraordinary. It's amazing the stuff that the BBC will censor, but not a problem with murderers, eh? And knife crime has surged across the country, driven by a 47% rise in violent robberies and phone thefts. And as we know, Mike Graham and many others in this building have been victims of that. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. Benedict, I'll just read out the questions I particularly want people to answer, and we'll get to both of those with you as well. Israel and Hamas agreeing the ceasefire, we're told, not over the line just yet. I mean, this is the thing. It doesn't happen until it happens, and it could break down at any time. Funnily enough, difficult to trust terrorists. They're not always that straightforward. I know. I'm as surprised as you are. But it's due to start on Sunday. I want to know, from what you know about it, from these different phases, is it a good deal? And is it a good deal for Hamas? Is it a good deal for Israel? Either, none? Give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Text the word TALK to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text cost £1, standard network rate message. Same contact details for a question about the Royal College of Nursing. Harrowing report revealing basically a war zone in our NHS hospitals. Routinely, patients lying in trolleys in the corridor, not getting treated. Nurses overwhelmed and even being too busy to even know that a patient has died on a trolley in a corridor. Absolutely extraordinary. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Benedict, let's start with Gaza and what's going on there. What do you make of this delay on this ceasefire deal? We're told it's all signed and sealed. Sounds like Hamas are, well, the claim is, again, from both sides, Hamas is backtracking.
I mean, for a start, there was a need to rush this announcement out from the US because this is what this is ultimately about. It's for the consumption of a US audience, not necessarily for the Middle East, which you might think is a bit strange given that this is a hostage exchange between two warring sides there. But this was the Biden administration trying to piggyback on the Trump administration so that both sides can say we've got to win either late in the day, very late in the day, or good and early. But both sides, obviously, in this conflict absolutely loathe each other. Both sides don't trust each other. Hamas has a history of duplicitous behaviour. And frankly, why wouldn't
Wait a minute, why would people who would take babies hostage, would rape and mutilate women and murder innocent families in their homes, why on earth would you think that they wouldn't be honest?
You'd think after a while of them being killed in great big numbers that they might run out of people who had that mindset, but it turns out not necessarily. They're still there. But also from a purely practical perspective, why would Hamas give these people up? If that's their worldview, hostages are pretty much their only leverage at the moment because they know that Israel will go to will lengths.
This is one of my concerns, though. I mean, the reason why they took hostages was for leverage. They thought it might possibly stop Israel bombing. Yeah. Israel did bomb, then they've been, we were killing innocent children in Palestinians. You're also risking the lives of your hostages, and they've got something to negotiate with. Otherwise, they've got nada, nothing, zilch, zero. That's what they did. So when you do a deal where you've hand back loads of prisoners, Hamas prisoners, including Hamas terrorists. Okay, a few years back, it was, Yahya Sinwar, who then masterminded the Hamas attack on October the 7th, who was one of those prisoners who was released in a similar sort of exchange deal. You hand those people back, it's an interesting exchange rate. Now, not as bad as previously, but it'd be like 1,000 prisoners for one IDF soldier who'd been held captive. But I mean, to get those, if it was my baby and my toddler, if it was my daughter, if I was the mother of Emily Denari, 28-year-old British Israeli, you know what? Any price I'm happy to be paid to get my child back. But Is it a good idea for governments to do that? Because what you're telling them, what you're telling Hamas right now, and Hezbollah and Iran, you know what, take hostages. That's the leverage. That's the thing that really puts pressure on our government. That's the thing that will get us to the negotiating table. That's the thing that will get you the aid. That's the thing that will help you. Are we not, and Israel not setting themselves up for more failure in the future?
Only if they actually abide by the ceasefire, which I don't think they're going to. Politically,
Israel.
Israel. It doesn't actually matter what Hamas does. It's whether or not Israel takes its own defence around Gaza seriously.
But they're reserving the right that if there are further threats...
Much in the same way as when there was the ceasefire in Lebanon with Hezbollah, Israel reserved the right to be able to go in and bomb whoever they want if they think that Hezbollah is about to violate it, which they have. It's written in the ceasefire agreement, and I know that lots of Middle Eastern outlets go, oh, well, they're violating the ceasefire. No, it's there in black and white because they won, basically. We can do what we want. I imagine... even though it won't be couched in those terms, because, again, this is being sold to an audience in the US that is actually instinctively very anti-Israel, strangely enough. The Israelis, they're going to keep the Philadelphia corridor. They're going to keep the perimeter very tight. There's no... whatever freedoms there were for people in Gaza before, and there weren't huge amounts relatively, that's not going to happen again. And I think
But we also know an awful lot of aid is going to go in. Billions and billions in aid is going to go in.
It's not actually going to change anything.
Yeah, OK, well, great. I'm glad that people are going to get food and water and medicine. I absolutely don't want ordinary people to be suffering. But we know what happened to the aid last time it all went in.
Yeah,
and it went to Hamas. They built tunnels. And we're not talking about, like, digging a little tunnel. We were talking... You've seen the images. I mean, these are epic. You can get a Humvee through these tunnels.
Well, but this is partly,
They've
of
got
course,
lighting,
why...
electricity...
when we're talking about a massive sort of rebuilding program for Gaza, lots of other Middle Eastern states who, the expectation is that they will bear the brunt of the financial costs of rebuilding Gaza, they don't want Hamas there because they know what happens to the money when it goes in. They don't want their money to be wasted. Actually, the average, Gulf princeling is not an idiot.
They want this all to go away.
They understand how this works.
But in terms of Arab populations in many of those countries, they are far more extreme than their leadership.
They are.
Apart from Iran, where they're the more extreme.
I have to say, actually, the leaderships of a lot of Arab countries are sick to the teeth of the Palestinian issue. They don't like them as people.
It was a useful weapon they had against the West and against Israel for a long time.
But these people, as I say, they're not stupid. They understand that the Palestinians have lost this. They're not going to get their state in the form that they want it to be. And the lesson of that is, if you keep on invading your bigger, stronger neighbour and you keep losing and you're not very good at war, you can't be surprised when after a while that country goes, OK, that territory, that's ours now. You're not having that. It's what happened to Germany. It's what happened to Italy. It's what happened to Japan. That's the lesson of history.
But also the West is not going to allow Israel to be wiped off the map. End of. We're not. Well, Israel ain't going to allow Israel to be wiped off
Israel
the map.
Won't.
And I'm with them 100% of that. I do want to play a quick clip, though, of Joe Biden yesterday. We had the Qatari Prime Minister, because we're all just pretending Qatar is this lovely, cuddly country. They've been harbouring terrorists all these time. But Joe Biden made his announcement from the White House, who then later on made his sort of final speech from the White House, a final address to the nation. There's some interesting stuff in that as well. But this is him. I mean, do listen closely to every word. It's very short. This is Joe Biden, who apparently closely involved in those negotiations, announcing that ceasefire.
I can announce a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas. For more than 15 months of conflict that began with Hezbollah's brutal massacre on October the 7th.
He doesn't even know who committed the October the 7th. He said it's Hezbollah.
Yeah.
I mean, thank God he's moving on. It's outrageous.
I mean, a couple of weeks ago, he also said that he was in negotiations with the Emir of Kuwait rather than of Qatar over this, which must have come as a real surprise to the Emir of Kuwait.
Absolutely.
To find that he was in the middle of these negotiations.
Let me also ask you about this NHS story, as a Royal College of Nursing report showing, I mean, again, war zones effectively in our hospitals. I mean, does it tell us anything new? Well, it's harrowing detail from nurses who worked on A&E wards and talk about the care in the corridors, just so routine now, to the extent that we're treating the Health Secretary. I mean, they literally just putting in, links for oxygen masks and things like that. So they're basically accepting that this is what's going to happen. Now, often if you're on a trolley, let's be honest, a lot of those trolleys are similar to the beds that are already in the wards. And it seems to me, having been in A&E in the last year, you don't necessarily need to have that much space around. I get that. Not everybody needs to have the sort of intense care that we often think of as someone needing in A&E, the triage and the like. But they are talking about patients who do need to be admitted, who are seriously unwell or seriously injured, lying on corridors for hours. I've got a family member of mine, 24 hours with a broken pelvis, who is lying on a trolley for 24 hours before being admitted, and an elderly relative of mine stuck in an ambulance for 4 hours with heart problems and breathing problems. With luckily with the ambulance crew, you're safer with the ambulance crew there, but genuinely, and the extraordinary situation where you've got nurses saying we've got people dying on their trolleys and we don't even know they've died.
Yeah, I have had an elderly relative in a similar situation last year where they were just sort of stuck on a chair in a corridor for a very long time, having had a stroke, which is one of those things where you kind of think, good Lord, that could have gone very badly wrong. Fortunately, it didn't. But again, the NHS perpetually in crises that are foreseen decades in advance due to really simple things like changing demographics, like ageing populations, like an inability to train enough doctors and nurses, and, I'm afraid, exacerbated by the fact that we have huge numbers of people coming into this country who are able to access treatment the second that they get here. We're one of the few countries that does not demand that people sort of pay their own way or anything like that. Those numbers are only going to continue. And there doesn't really seem to be much of a long-term plan. I mean, forget the short-term plan to alleviate it. I'm all for short-term plans, but actually what we haven't heard for time immemorial is, what are you going to do about this long-term? How are you going to actually train enough doctors and nurses so you don't have to strip mine the third world for people who are underqualified to come and just prop up the thing? What are you going to do long-term? There isn't an answer to this. There is, not coming from government. We all know what the actual answer is, which is probably to completely rip down the edifice as it currently is and start again. But no politician is brave enough to actually talk about that. We're sort of fiddling on the edges, or a little bit more money here, maybe you'll have to pay for a few more appointments, or maybe you might have to pay for your prescriptions, or maybe we'll use AI, whatever that means. It's not actually
we're still using fax machines. The idea we're going to use AI, what an absolute
that we're going to have some sort of intelligent interface is just suddenly going to appear. It's not going to happen.
Well, look, news that came in the last half hour is going to be very interesting to see what happens, because we've had Labour MP Mike Amesbury, he's the MP for Runcorn and Helsby. He basically punched a man in the street back in Cheshire in October. It was an extraordinary story. He appeared in court this morning at Chester Magistrate Court. He pleaded guilty to assault by beating for punching that man. Now, obviously, he'll be sentenced for that at a later date, but that does mean there is going to be, of course, a by-election in that constituency. A majority of around 14,700 for Labour. Reform, though, in second place at 7,662. They've put it on their target list. Very, very interesting to see whether reform, have you seen that poll? There's 1 point behind Labour. The circumstances, of a recall, well, it won't even have to be a recall. He'll have to resign. But, I mean, realistically, where do you think that will go?
I mean, what is that a swing that they'd need of about... How many thousand votes is that? Sort of 14,000 majority, and they had that. So it's not.
It completely changes. The turnout in elections often it can be double that in a by-election.
Well, that's the thing. It's not. But
reform voters likely to turn out.
Well, exactly. Reform voters are more likely to turn out. A lot of people very unhappy with Labour. It's not that big a swing. Even if there is a sort of a massive uptick, you wouldn't imagine that would be more people coming out to vote for the Labour candidate, given how things are currently going. Who knows? There could be the absolute whirlwind, and the Tories could come from nowhere to claim this seat. Lol. It's probably not going to happen. But yeah, this is going to be a referendum ultimately on how well the government's doing. And the key thing is actually reform don't even need to win it necessarily. You just need to see a narrowing of that gap. And I suspect that is what you're going to see.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fascinating. Well, you mentioned the Tories there. Kemi Badenoch's giving a speech in a couple of hours' time. We told us her first big speech of the new year. I'm afraid, I think, what's going on in Gaza and elsewhere might actually take over a little bit more of that. Oh, by the way, we've also had the first major speech from Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader. I mean, really, major speech by Ed Davey. Is that a thing? Major arrival at a theme park, an amusement park by Ed Davey. Yes, that's the thing. Major splash falling off a paddleboard.
I don't know. Be this high to vote Lib Dem.
Exactly. So, I mean, yes, exactly. But Ed Davey's called for us, of course, to go back into the EU customs union. Of course he has. It's in his DNA. Interesting, Kemi Badenoch she's talked about how she's not going to make any proper policy commitments for a couple of years. I've got to be honest with you, I'm not sure that's going to fly. She's going to have some clear points, of where she stands on things. But in her speech, she's going to be talking about sort of admitting conservative errors, admitting mistakes, crucially over immigration, saying we're going to cut immigration and then rocket boost it's under it. Who did that? Who did that the most? Boris Johnson. Can everyone stop holding a candle for Boris Johnson, please? But also net zero, pushing for net zero target, the 2050 target, but not having a plan. Again, that's not quite right, is it? Because the point is not having a net zero target is the thing. But also planning, pushing through Brexit without actually having a plan for growth outside the EU. There is no growth inside the EU. Has anyone seen what's happening to the EU economy right now? It's mad. It sounds like she's on the right track. Admitting mistakes on those two things, yes. But it seems to me that she's still not quite got it.
No, but I don't think she's likely to get it anytime soon. I don't think she'll make it to the next general election, if I'm being completely honest. It is a step in the right direction in that, theoretically at least, if you hold these things up and say, we made a mistake, we made a mistake, we made a mistake, theoretically, that should mean that the party does not then begin reversing back on these things if you have very publicly stood up and gone, wow, these were mistakes and we shouldn't have done them. Yeah. And I know that many members of the Conservative Party would really like to double down on net zero and on high migration and probably on rejoining the EU at some point. But if you draw a line under that, at least for Kemi Badenoch's leadership, hypothetically, that won't then happen. Yeah. But how long will she last? And when she does get knifed, which she will do by the party because she's not good enough to overcome Starmer or Reform, then the question will be, right, who do they go for? Somebody who is even more sort of inclined to make those changes?
Robert Jenrick is clearly not given up
of course.
his leadership.
I think that's sensible. But does that mean that we're going to get a Robert Jenrick, or does that mean that the Tories will go back to the more
James
centrist?
Cleverly?
Exactly. Are we going to go back to the man who started the Chagos Islands fiasco?
Yes.
It's the sort of thing that the Tories would do, because they hate themselves more than they hate the country. And that's quite a feat,
that's an interesting
analysis. Basically sums them up.
What do you make of Keir Starmer visiting Kyiv? I was saying, looking like a member of New Order, interestingly. Signing this 100-year friendship deal. Okay, what does that matter? They just need money now. I still don't understand why all that money from Russian banks and Russian oligarchs frozen in bank accounts, still making money, by the way, for the banks that have got them in London. Why all that money hasn't just been literally strip those accounts, nice big transfer. I think you're limited, aren't you, to 30,000, but I'm sure over a period of it they could do a big transfer, just take it all over. There you go, Kyiv. This is for buying weapons. This is for rebuilding your country with Russian money after Russian devastation. The timing of this visit, I'm shocked that Keir Starmer, in the first 6 months of being Prime Minister, has gone everywhere. What are you doing in Saudi Arabia and you haven't visited Ukraine? I think that's outrageous. But secondly, the significance just before Donald Trump comes in, we know that Donald Trump is standing much more sort of firmly behind Israel than he is behind Ukraine. He wants both Russia and Ukraine to come to the table. That is a message that says to Putin, you can keep a load of your territory that you've stolen from the Ukrainian people. Is this Keir Starmer trying to show European support? Because at the end of the day, without American military might and backing, it doesn't really matter what we do.
Yeah, the UK is toothless. We're not a power anymore. Certainly not a military
power. We can't defend ourselves, let alone Ukraine.
And I think Keir Starmer I do think that he does believe in the Ukrainian cause, but also he's looked at what it did for Boris Johnson. It kept Boris Johnson's head almost above the surface, because people do recognise also
Boris
that the
Johnson did a good job there.
He did, even though, again, his government was vastly responsible for helping this country get to the position where it is effectively useless on the international stage. Keir Starmer's obviously making that worse, but it's nice to know that we're friends with people. On the subject of money transfers, the reason why that wasn't going to happen is if you start
Russian money frozen in banks.
If you take Russian money that's in Western bank accounts and with Western institutions, and you say, well, we're going to give it to Ukraine, then overnight accounts run by China and just about every sort of Middle Eastern and African and Latin American country as well, they would start moving their accounts out of that Western banking sector. And this is the problem. We say, we have chained ourselves to this because we are part of a global community, which is the biggest load of nonsense you've ever heard. But that's what we've decided to do, and it would collapse a lot of the West's financial power, which is one of the few things that we still have, although
basically our entire country is run on the taxes paid by British banking in the city.
It is, but again, the rest of the world is wising up to this, which is why they are trying to move away, not just actually from the City of London, but they're actively trying to undermine the power of the dollar. China, Saudi Arabia, all of these countries, they recognise that actually the power is not infinite, and it can be shifted if they themselves decouple themselves from Western financial systems.
Talking of money and power, just briefly, in Joe Biden's sort of farewell address to the US people last night, he warned, it's wonderful, I love this, he warned of an oligarchy of wealth and power that's threatening US democracy. Clear dig at the number of billionaires, particularly the likes of Elon Musk, the world's richest man. surrounding Donald Trump. I think he's going to have, huge. I think half his cabinet are going to be billionaires. It's quite extraordinary. Now, he would say, well, I'm celebrating people who are just very successful, very good at what they do. But, of course, you might get a different take on that. But it's a bit rich, is it, Joe Biden? They have no issue with the people who own social media companies who were shilling for them and, like Zuckerberg, willing to do their bidding and censor for them to protect them and their terrible decisions over lockdown and things like that. And the Hunter Biden laptop. They've got no problem with billionaires and big business that does their bidding. There's got a problem with big business and billionaires who don't do their bidding. But the real worry, I think, for ordinary people and ordinary voters on both sides of the Atlantic is, you know what? Billionaires have more say than us.
Well,
that's not what democracy is supposed to be about.
A billion ain't what it used to be, thanks to inflation. Ever thus has it been, though, in the United States and here, frankly. There is this idea that once upon a time we lived in this wonderful, perfect democracy. Neither the UK nor the US has ever been a fully functioning democracy. Money goes a very long way. As I say, I'm not sure why people are surprised by this, especially also with the onset of technology and the greater power of more individuals over this sort of industry. And let's be honest here, that's partly because government is so far behind the curve. We're surprised that people like, the Silicon Valley tech moguls have a disproportionate amount of power. Yeah, that's because our own governments haven't got a clue what this stuff is and frankly aren't interested in it. Rather telling that when we were talking about, the AI revolution in the UK, the government announces, well, we're going to use it to solve potholes that have already been identified by people 6 months ago. And you think, Elon Musk will take himself to Mars. Jeff Bezos will get to the Kuiper Belt. And we will still be using AI to maybe slightly trim the NHS.
We will still not be filling in potholes.
Exactly.
11:24 is the time. We're going to take a break. I want to hear from you, 0344 499 1000, or anything that we're talking about. In particular, I want to hear about the NHS. I want to hear about also that ceasefire deal. Is it a good deal? And if so, for whom? 0344 499 1000 is the number. This is Talk.
corruption scandal, not of her making, but in the family. Her aunt was the leader of Bangladesh.
And there was definitely some connection to Tulip.
Even if it was the house she lived in.
There was that, I think she was involved in some way in a deal done with Russia back in 2013, done with Vladimir Putin to build a nuclear reactor in Bangladesh.
Yep.
And she was pictured with her aunt and Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's get straight to your calls. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call on anything we're talking about today. Jerry's calling in from Cardiff. And Jerry, you wanted to talk about that Royal College of Nursing report, talk about, patients dying on corridors, on trolleys in corridors and not even being noticed because the nurses are so just overwhelmed with the number of patients. What do you want to say?
Why are you making a fuss about it?
Oh, it's not a problem?
Well, this has been going on in Wales for 10 years, and every report is issued, everybody ignores it.
That is a fair point, bearing in mind that we're told that the NHS has been run down by the Tories all these years, but the NHS, the health services devolved responsibility. It's been run by a Labour government in Wales all this time, and it's in a worse state there.
Thank you very much. That's exactly right. Even 2 days ago, we had the Welsh Health Minister, where a report was published about how bad the mental health issues are in Wales, and he didn't recognise the problems that were in the report. He was asked 2 weeks ago about ambulances.
Yeah.
And he said, well, the thing is, yes, you still have to wait, unfortunately, but on average, they're getting to you quicker.
On average. But also, it's the unfortunate. I have to say, I mean, if there was a serious accident or a member of my family was having a heart attack, I would say, call 999, worth a try, and then call a cab. Or, you know what, flag down a passing motorist and ask for a lift to the nearest hospital, because I would not trust that I could get to hospital.
But exactly, but all this business of people on trolleys has been going on for years in Wales. All the hospital A&Es in Wales are run down. It's like going into a war zone every day.
What do you put it down to?
Mismanagement by all the health administrations.
You don't think it's down to money?
Well, of course, it's not totally money. It's the health, like the trust boards are misspending money. The money is not going to where it needs to be, such as the front line. Yeah. It's more rainbow lanyards and attending conferences about net zero. Diversity offices. And, let's go to this conference in America. We got to do this. We got to do that. But none of it is going to the front line. I just quickly will end this by saying, 8 years ago, I fractured my skull and was taken into hospital. I spent 2 days in a chair in the local A&E in Cardiff. I was then progressed out of the chair onto a trolley. And because I was still in the corridor, I was moved to a new room that they'd composed to put people in. There was 30 people in a room, all with different diagnosis going on, no curtains, some were in chairs, some were on trolleys. And now suddenly the nurses have written a report in England, and there's uproar about it. Yeah, no, I can understand why you're so frustrated. I absolutely can. Jerry, well, thank God you survived that. Jerry in Cardiff there, talking about the NHS. Let's also talk to Chris. Now, Chris, you're in Cambridge. We spoke about half an hour ago to Graham Linehan about this trans-identified man who's been nominated as one of the actresses, supposedly, for the Best Actress category.
Can I just say first, that's why I love the Welsh.
We all love the Welsh. Come on then. Right, come on then. So, Chris, what do you want to say?
Look, now back to that. It's quite simple. We're all here, men, women alike. We should all be equal in terms of the way we live our lives, what we get and everything else. At the end of it, they shouldn't need... everything goes wrong when one tries to become the other. And I saw the Olympics with that so-called he-she fighting in the boxing.
A man pretending to be a woman, hitting a woman repeatedly in the face to win the medal.
All I would like to say is the person that said that was okay should be tied in a chair whilst that so-called boxer hit him in the face.
Yes, wouldn't perhaps like it so much. But for you, this man who's an actor, he can live his best life, call himself what he wants. I don't care what he's done to himself. He's an adult, tidy his own business. But he has no right being nominated in the Best Actress category.
There's only one answer to it. They have their own category.
Well, their own... why?
Simple. Because they are entitled to take part in something.
No one's stopping him taking part. He could be nominated in the Best Male category.
Yeah, that's right.
So he doesn't need his own category because he's already got one. He's a male.
I totally agree with you. I always say you take a Ford Anglia, you change the headlights, it's still a Ford Anglia.
On that, we're going to leave it. Chris in Cambridge, thank you very much, Dean. We're going to take a quick break. Up next, we are going to be talking to Dr. Lawrence Gurlis about what's going on in NHS. We're also going to talk to the crime editor of The Sun, Mike Sullivan, about that masked drill rapper being promoted by the BBC when it turns out he was the murderer of 16-year-old schoolboy Jimmy Mason. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 11:35 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Benedict Spencer with me as well. Let's talk to Lawrence Gurlis now. He's GP at Same Day Doctor and then also an NHS GP with over 30 years' experience about these, extraordinary claims being made in a report from the Royal College of Nursing about really war zone-like conditions in many A&Es. People not only waiting on trolleys for 24 hours, 48 hours plus to be treated, but often patients even dying on trolleys and corridors and no one noticing or having time to deal with it. Let's talk about this. Lawrence, I mean, is this what you recognise? Is this your experience?
Yes, and as your caller from Wales said, we do have a winter crisis every year, so why the fuss? I think why the fuss...
Well, no, his point was it's been going on in Wales for a decade and no one cared.
Yeah, it's been much worse this year. We've been a bit unlucky because there is a very bad flu epidemic. We're seeing a huge amount of flu. I can't remember the last time we saw this much flu. We've been distracted by COVID, which we had no flu during the 2-3 winters of COVID. Yeah. And we haven't had a bad flu epidemic for over 10 years, but this is a bad one. And, the other thing, the timing is terrible because if we're going to have an epidemic, then over Christmas when people are socialising, going to restaurants, sitting indoors, it's a super spreader situation, and I'm afraid we're reaping the whirlwind of that. So we have been unlucky. I'm not apportioning blame. If you run a service at 90-95% capacity, then clearly when when these things happen, you don't have any.
But the rest of Europe doesn't do this. The rest of Europe, and often those countries that don't even spend more as a percentage of GDP on their health services, they run at sort of 80% capacity. So if there's a major accident, if there is a big outburst of flu or any other disease, they've got the capacity built in. Not more stats that have come out today suggesting that 1 in 7 of all patients sitting in hospital beds right now in England actually don't need to be there. They are physically able to go home. I mean, 1 in 7. That's got up. It was 1 in 8. Now it's 1 in 7. But again, how many times have we been told we've got to deal with social care, otherwise we can't deal with the pressures both going in and leaving our hospitals? And yet, once again, the problem of dealing with social care and funding it nationally and tying it in with the NHS has been kicked into the long grass by a new government, as happens every time from every new government. I mean, remember Boris Johnson? I've got a ready-made plan. Never saw it.
No, you're absolutely right. That's one of many factors, and the fact they kicked that can down the road was a great disappointment. You freeing up hospital beds would be important, but that's been it's there are many factors. I don't like to criticise my fellow GPs, but general practice is in its own silo, and they tend not to deal with seriously ill patients. I've heard GPs say, no, we're not for urgent care. You go to A&E, and A&E has become the dumping ground, I'm afraid.
Neither an accident nor an emergency, something you should have gone to your GP for, And,
I blame us, the public. Many of us misuse or overuse accident and emergency. And more importantly, we've voted for this because every time an election comes up, if any party were to say we're going to do a radical reform of the health service, with safety nets for the vulnerable, but there would be something that introduces fee paying to make us like those European countries you refer to, we wouldn't vote for it. So the public, in their own way, have voted for this, and we can't ignore our responsibility. If this is unacceptable to us, we need to do something about it. I've got lots of ideas, but I don't profess to be able to solve this problem. Our population has grown. We've got the elderly.
But again, the people in charge, that world-class civil service we've got, and all those clever ministers and things. Surely, I mean, oh look, we've got a whole load of people, particularly say, I always talk about this. My parents' age, you've got the baby boomers. Oh, look, there's a massive, big, huge extra bulge in the population of another people who all in the last few years have got to an age where they're, I'm afraid, getting more ill. I mean, everyone you will see, there's a point where you've got these people who are really, really healthy at 70, doing really well. 75 seems to start going downhill. People need more and more care through their 80s and 90s, and it was totally predictable. It's as predictable as we've got a load of kids being born in 1 year. I wonder if they're going to need schools to go to in 4.5 years' time. It is ridiculous that we don't do any proper planning. We don't think we need to train up a load more doctors. We need to have more hospital beds. There's going to be more pressure on social care. It all happens to us, and it's an absolute surprise. And just as the winter crisis is a surprise every year, even though it comes straight after the autumn crisis. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a complete abject failure of long-term planning and thinking. And I blame both politicians, civil servants, but also, crucially, NHS managers.
I agree with everything you say. Look, I think that we need to... The money's in the wrong place. There are 30% more doctors in hospitals than there were 5 years ago.
Are there?
There are plenty of doctors. They're in the wrong place.
But wait a minute. Are they? Is that per full-time doctor, or are they working 3 days a week?
No, that's full-time equivalent. There are 30% more. But they're not the doctors working in accident and emergency. They're being soaked up into all other roles, which are just as important. But we have a silo mentality in the health service. The money's in the wrong silos. We should have an integrated system between general practice and accident and emergency. The separation of general practice and hospitals is one of the causes of this situation, because GPs and they're very busy, but they're doing a lot of admin, a lot of chronic disease management. They won't see these sick patients. A lot of these people in the hospital have been sent there from care homes, or they're elderly people on their own. If you're in a care home and they tell us they're not nursing homes and you get the flu, they'll just call an ambulance and send the person into A&E, and then there'll be a bed blocker. And that's not the way to run a health service. There should be a better community care service that integrates GPs and hospitals, and that would be a start to solving this problem.
Yeah, a lot of people who've discussed this before, they talk about, the cottage hospital system.
Yeah.
But again, everyone says it's very complicated. Well, yes, it is, and it's very costly. Yes, it is. But it's not really negotiable. And it seems to be it's only when you get certain stories that hit the front page, certain crises, that people, the politicians, finally sort of wake up and say we have to do something about it. I had quite high hopes for Wes Streeting, and I did think, you know what, if you're going to reform the NHS, it's probably going to be easier coming from a Labour health secretary than it is a Tory health secretary. 24 hours to save the NHS and all that nonsense. But I just don't think we're going to see anything of it because they're so beholden to the unions. I don't know why the unions are still so wedded to this system. I have a friend who has just got back from a long Christmas, New Year break, who's Romanian, went back to Romania. I said, well, did you have a good holiday? And she said, well, actually, I was in hospital for 2 weeks of it. I got really seriously ill and I was in hospital. I said, well, lucky you being in Romania, because you probably got into hospital quicker, you were treated quicker, and that's probably why you've recovered, so well. I mean, and she laughed and said, yeah, that's probably true. I mean, it is bizarre. I know so many people who now have private healthcare who either would never have thought of spending their money on it, they didn't have the money, that wasn't something they could just easily just get, or they morally thought, I wouldn't do that, that's, I rely on the NHS, who are now just, sod it. I do not believe the NHS is going to be there for me in my or my family's time of need. So people always say they don't want to have a service that's different for the rich, that's different for the poor. We've got that.
We've got that. We've had a two-tier system for a long time. Exactly right. It's managed decline, Julia. We're just managing the decline of the health service. It's not going to change. There isn't the political will. There actually isn't the demand from the public because... The RCN can produce this report, but if everyone will forget this in 2 months' time.
2 hours' time.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, again, it's just bizarre but I don't know anyone who hasn't got a personal experience of not being able to see a GP when they need to, not being able to get into A&E, not being able to get an ambulance. Everyone, I've got a healthy family. Okay, we're sort of, people eat fairly well. No one's sort of, they're not smokers or really obese. We're very, very lucky. We haven't got all these chronic diseases. And I know so I've got 4 members of my family who've been failed by the NHS in the last couple of years. So, I can't believe that other families haven't got more. So why isn't there a public demand for change?
Because people in this country, they're absolutely wedded to the idea of not paying for healthcare.
We do pay for it. We pay taxes.
Yeah. There are people that refuse to pay anything extra. I know people, you talk about people take out insurance. I know people who can afford to take out insurance or to see private GPs who just refuse to do it. It's totally against their DNA. As far as they're concerned, NHS healthcare is, in inverted commas, free. Yeah. As you say, it's not free at all. We're paying a lot.
Yeah.
But people...
Keir Starmer's family. He said he proudly tells this story, doesn't he? Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it? Dr. Lawrence Gunn, I so appreciate you joining us, a GP at Same Day Doctor. Thank you for that. That he's been an NHS GP for years, but he also did private practice. People want to get access. Benedict Spence, what are your thoughts on this?
On the subject of people getting private health insurance, a lot more people are, but also...
It's not the answer for most people. Most people can't afford it.
Well, that's the thing, it can't be. And also, increasingly, a lot of the people who are currently getting it are going to find it's actually increasingly unaffordable because their own wages and their own wealth are being eaten away by the lack of growth and
or their company stops providing it.
Yeah, so it's not actually a long-term solution because actually we aren't creating enough wealth in this country for it to be a long-term solution. Now, if you deal with that, you'll raise more in tax revenue, you'll have more money to throw on the NHS bonfire, but you'll enable people to also take pressure off the system by going private. There'll be more incentive for people, but if you don't solve that, you don't have that incentive.
Also, the small issue that we've got, 10 million plus more people in the country.
Yep.
Who need healthcare.
Who are not all net contributors, but, it's fine because the size of GDP grows or something like that.
Some point worth making. A lot more people need more hospitals, more doctors, more nurses, more beds, but
half-wit country.
Just throwing that, we really aren't. We are a basket case of a country now, aren't we?
We are, and, I'm sorry, people just assume that because you're a first-world country, you'll always be a first-world country. How did it go for Argentina? How did it go for Lebanon? These countries are not even second-world countries anymore. It can happen if you just sit on your hands and go, I'm sure everything will work itself out because of who we are.
He's turned up in a great mood today, hasn't he?
I'm in a fantastic mood. I'm just telling you how things are going to go.
11:46 is the time. Up next, going to be talking to the crime editor of The Sun about their incredible splash news today about a rapper on the BBC is the killer of 16-year-old schoolboy Jimmy Mizzen. BBC... happy to big him up, even though he's talking about and glorifying the murder he committed. We'll talk about that up next. This is Talk.
Corruption scandal, not of her making, but in the family. Her aunt was the leader of Bangladesh,
and there was definitely some connection to Tulip.
Even if it was the house she lived in.
There was that, yeah. I think she was involved in some way in a deal done with Russia back in 2013, done with Vladimir Putin to build a nuclear reactor in Bangladesh.
Yep.
And she was pictured with her aunt and Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 11:50 is the time. Let's turn our attention right now to what's been going on, well, not just Britain's streets, but also, of course, what's going on at the BBC. Now, I'm sure, like you, like me, obviously, big fan of BBC Radio 1 Extra. No, it's probably not aimed at us. It's urban appeal, apparently. That's a code, by the way. You have to know the code. It's not really music for us. It's drill, it's rap, it's grime. It's a very niche market, but a very popular market, particularly among young gangsters. We saw only last week a 14-year-old lad murdered, stabbed to death on a bus in broad daylight on his first day back at school. 3 arrests have already been made in that case, but he was a drill rapper himself. And of course, threats being made. We know that, threats made by these various rappers often lead to stabbings and deaths on the street. Well, The Sun have got an extraordinary story today, an exclusive. Rapper on BBC is Jimmy's killer. Now, this refers to the schoolboy, the 16-year-old schoolboy, a gentle giant. He was described by, as his family as Jimmy Mizzen, and he was murdered, killed in cold blood back in 2008 by a man who then went on to get convicted and to serve 14 years behind bars. That man is now out of prison, and he is the man pictured on the front page of The Sun. He's also a man whose drill raps are now all over the BBC. He wears a balaclava. No one thought to ask. I wonder why he's wearing a balaclava when some of the lyrics that he's got in his raps are actually about glorifying the murder that he committed. We're joined right now by the crime editor at The Sun, Mike Sullivan. Mike, you covered this case at the time.
I did.
And the trial. This man went away for life term, minimum term, 14 years.
Yeah,
He's out on the streets.
It's quite sickening to know what he's doing now. He was very young at the time, so hence, arguably, it was a low tariff, but that would explain it. But
I'm surprised he got that long.
Well, he had a pretty appalling history of violence.
This wasn't a one-off.
It wasn't a one-off, and really, I mean, Jimmy's family described him as a time bomb, and they're quite correct. I mean, it was an inevitable conclusion, really, for the way he was living his life.
And there were witnesses to, as he thrown... Tell us about the actual crime he committed.
Well, the story... I'd like to tell you something about Fari himself, because...
This is his name, Jake Fari.
Jake Fari.
Known as 10, is a rapper.
He's now known as 10, this anonymous rapper who transpires to be a killer. Quite what questions were asked about who he actually was, as you've alluded to. Who knows? But that's obviously something the BBC have got to ask for themselves. Fari, his first involvement with Jimmy's family was when he was only 11 years old, and he robbed Jimmy's brother of 20 pence, punched him in the stomach after school. Jimmy comes from a very upstanding family. His mother and his father were very upset about what happened to Jimmy's brother, Harry. Complained to the school, and Fari obviously took umbrage about this, and a couple of years later he beat up Harry again in the street, and the family went to the police on that occasion, got involved. The police gave him a harassment warning, and this was one of the just a number of things which
and it wasn't the only family he was targeting.
I mean,
and then he kills
and targeting girls as well. A year before he murdered Jimmy, he'd been arrested for raping a 13-year-old girl and charged with it. That case was dropped. You see where we're going.
Yeah, he's a wrong-un.
He's a wrong-un.
He's a wrong-un. He was a danger. He's wrong. He commits this murder. By all accounts, according to witnesses, he is in a takeaway. He swaggers out of this takeaway with a smile on his face.
Well, yeah, in the first instance, he'd seen Harry, who he'd robbed previously, in the Bakers. Harry was with Jimmy. This is Harry Mrison, with his brother Jimmy, and started hassling them. I mean, now, Jake Fari is 5'7", Jimmy's 6'4", but he was only 16, and this Fari is aggressive, he's nasty.
Yeah.
In a Bakers in Lee, South East London, on a Saturday morning, sees them, starts hassling them, then started throwing plastic drinks bottles at them. The boys stood up to him. Fari, when left the Bakers, grabbed an advertising board with this metal frame and started poking at Jimmy, who punches were exchanged. The boys fell into this cake display. At that point, Fari's arrogance couldn't sort of let this go, so he grabbed a hot glass dish of sausages and hurled it at Jimmy. Tragically, it hit him in the neck and impacted, fragmented, and Jimmy, it severed his main arteries and he bled to death. And it was a senseless, pointless murder.
Yeah, but again, it could have happened at any time to anyone almost. He was a tinderbox. So this man, this boy as he was then, he serves his time. He serves 14 years. Parole board. Again, one would argue.
Can I just describe what he was like in court, which I saw?
Yeah, I should probably not, because we haven't got too much time. He comes out of jail. Now, part of the, his parole board has to rule, that he is he's safe on the streets. He serves his minimum term. He's now basically trying to become a drill rap star.
Which he wanted to be in the first place.
And he was, doing that behind the bars as well. The lyrics of his songs are, some of them are about this killing. They're about this death. Glorifying it, celebrating it. There's no sense of remorse. There's no sense of trying to turn things around. He's covered in tattoos. He wears a balaclava. He's been all over BBC One Extra. Now, BBC One Extra, interestingly, they clearly must have been aware that some of the lyrics were unacceptable, because they did actually censor and beep out some of the lyrics, but kept a lot of it in. Do you think they knew who he was?
I would very much doubt it. I mean, if they'd asked the questions and carried out the proper research on who he was.
Due diligence, but they wouldn't.
But why would they? I mean, if they did that...
Is there an issue? Look, I mean, the Sun, you know, I'm saying that this is outrageous, this guy's been played. The BBC, there's a lot of censoring, you know, climate deniers, transphobic people who understand biological sex. But they don't seem to have a problem with a drill rapper celebrating and glorifying violence that he himself has committed. Do you think that they should not have played him at all?
No, I think playing him was okay, but violent lyrics are unacceptable.
The BBC Charter was very clear about this.
Yeah, we are paying for this as licence payers. If you want to listen to this stuff on pirate radio, okay, but not the BBC.
And even if the BBC censors, you know, does a little beep, you know, or blocks out those some of those key words, basically you're bigging, you know, the DJs are bigging up this drill rap star. People can then go and find him on YouTube or Spotify or whatever, and then they can go and listen to the actual words, which are all about glorifying violence. And this at the same time as the BBC will be doing news reports saying, isn't it awful that all these young lads are killing each other, and often spurred on by these sort of drill rap battles that they have.
I mean, it revs it up, there's no doubt about it. I mean, we've seen that in lots of different court cases. It's been behind a lot of murders. However, there are some drill rap songs which are good, that don't allude to glorify violence or rape or murder. And I think in that respect you've got to be careful. I don't see
I don't want to ban... I don't think we should ban a genre of music.
I mean, otherwise what happened to punk rock? I mean,
exactly.
But in this instance, I mean, you've got him singing on the BBC about watching a man's soul leave after stabbing him and melting like Ben and Jerry's ice cream.
Yeah,
I mean,
and celebrating it. But the key thing also, I mean, you're not allowed to profit from your crimes once you leave jail, are you?
You're not allowed to profit, no, from selling media stories, so arguably that could potentially be
we understand prison authorities are looking into it.
Yeah,
the BBC are looking into it.
What they'll be able to do it. I mean, whether he's actually committing a crime is another matter. So they might be able to impose some kind of restrictions where he doesn't glorify what he does.
Or he has to have his lyrics checked.
Yeah,
I mean, again, I'm a free speech advocate, but there's some big question marks about this. Mike Sullivan, thank you so much for coming in talking about this. Crime editor at The Sun. We'll talk about this more. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Coming up next, we're going to take a quick break to the news. We're going to talk to the former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem about whether or not this ceasefire deal is actually going to happen, and if it does, is it a good deal for Israel or Hamas? This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, still joined by Conservative commentator Benedict Spence, who's back in that hot seat after the crime editor at The Sun has vacated it. With you live all the way until 1. And coming up in this hour, Israel and Hamas have, we're told, agreed a ceasefire to end 15 months of war. It's due to start on Sunday under the deal. It's got 3 phases. Hostages will be swapped for Hamas prisoners. The IDF withdraw from Gaza and a massive new reconstruction aid going in. However, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, has delayed the cabinet meeting. This was due to be, we thought, rubber-stamped by his cabinet, because he says that Hamas are reneging on some of the agreements that are already agreed. Things like, for instance, whether or not Israel has a veto, as Israel said had been agreed, over which prisoners get released. Also, we're going to be talking about an extraordinary situation where immigrants in Sweden are being asked to prove that they've lived an honest life before being granted citizenship under tighter rules announced by the government. I mean, what a silly idea. I mean, we would never do that here, would we? Shouldn't we? Plus, Kemi Badenoch is admitting in a speech to be made in the next few hours that the Tories did make mistakes over Brexit, over immigration and net zero in a major speech. But has she identified the right mistakes? Meanwhile, Lib Dem leader Ed Davey has said the UK should negotiate a new customs union deal with the EU. Of course he has. And this is going to surprise you, not at all. Heat pumps may never be cheaper than gas boilers. That's according to the Net Zero Secretary Ed Miliband. Heat pumps currently cost around 10 grand. That's compared to around 3 grand for a gas boiler. But that doesn't include all the massive cost, all the redecoration, all the restructuring you have to do to have one of those heat pumps. Oh, yeah, and the silly thing, I often forget to mention this. They don't work because they don't heat your sodding home. Anyway, that's all coming up. And whether you are listening on DAB Plus radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it's fabulous to have you join us. Great to have you also getting in touch on all the big stories we're talking about. Let's get to more of your calls in the next hour, asking you specifically about 2 topics, but always happy, as you know, to hear on your thoughts on all the topics we're talking about. First of all, is the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal, assuming it does go ahead, is it a good deal? And if so, for whom? Also, that harrowing report from the Royal College of Nursing revealing that dead patients are lying undiscovered on trolleys in corridors for hours in A&E because NHS staff are too overstretched to notice. Some nurses having to deal with up to 40 patients at a time. I mean, basically 39 patients ain't getting dealt with. I want to know your reaction to that. What's your experience, whether you work in the NHS, had to use the NHS in recent years? Do get in touch. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK, then your message to 87222. You can also get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs 1 standard rate message. We're hoping in the next couple of moments to be speaking to Fleur Hassan-Nahum, former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. Benedict Spence, just a quick word from you there. This meeting, this Israeli cabinet meeting has been delayed. Hamas accused of reneging on deals. Do you think the ceasefire deal is going to get over the line? It's going to actually happen on Sunday?
I think it's probably a bit touch and go. I wonder if it's entirely because of Hamas sort of reneging on the deal or trying to change parts of it, or whether or not it's because Netanyahu has to try to keep his coalition together. Yeah. I do wonder if maybe there's going to be a bit of politicking there, because I sincerely doubt many members of his coalition are going to be particularly thrilled by this, and it'll be as much about him being able to say to them, look, it's just a temporary thing, we'll get back on track later on, or whether or not this could be an existential problem, because ultimately Netanyahu is a political survivor, and a lot of this is about the just survival of his own government, as well as the war in Gaza.
And just him, really, isn't it? Well, look, let's talk to Fleur Hassan-Nahum right now. She's the former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, and she's now the Israeli Foreign Ministry's Special Envoy, and joins us once again. Good afternoon, Chief Fleur.
Hi, Julia. How are you?
Thank you so much for joining us. I think I'm rather better than you guys over there, because I'm looking at the terms of this deal. I think it's a terrible, terrible deal, unless, of course, you're one of the Israeli hostages currently being held by Hamas. First of all, before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, do you think it's actually going to happen? It's supposed to come into place on Sunday. We've already had, more rockets exchanged, more gunfire exchange between IDF and Hamas. 73 people in Gaza or killed since that deal was supposedly struck. We're now told that Hamas are trying to backtrack on various aspects of the deal. It's not been rubber-stamped by the Israeli cabinet. Do you think it's actually going to happen?
I think it's going to happen for one main reason, because of Trump, and Trump coming in on the 20th of January. I think that, people say that it's a very similar deal that was on the table in May, which even to Antony Blinken admitted was because Hamas decided not to take the deal. So Israel has always been willing to make some type of deal to get our people home. It's a national ethos in this country that no man or woman is left behind. And so, you ask how people feel. It's when your heart and your head feel different things, or are thinking. You think something, but you feel something else. You have young women who we know are being raped and molested and tortured there. We have a 3-year-old baby, a 1-year-old baby. How can we not do everything in our power to bring these people home? And so in the first phase of the deal, these are the other hostages that are supposed to go home. Will we get to the second stage of the deal when everybody else comes home? That nobody knows, and that's what we fear.
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? We don't even know at this point how many of the hostages are actually alive. What I find extraordinary is having to exchange later in the process bodies of hostages for live prisoners, when we know that a number of those prisoners are Hamas terrorists. It sounds like that Hamas are trying to renege on the deal that we understand, there are obviously third parties who can verify this, that had been agreed, which is that Israel would have a veto on who could actually be released. But we know some of the people who would be released back to Gaza, to the Palestinian territories, are, violent killers, terrorists, people men serving incredibly long sentences. That's happened before. Yahya Sinwar, mastermind of the Hamas attack on October the 7th, one such released prisoner. Is there a worry that, yes, you might get some hostages back this time, and this is a price that it's just the exchange rate these days of what you have to do. But are you not fearful that you are setting yourselves up for another October the 7th? Hamas have said that's what they want to do. There's no reason to think they've changed their mind, is there?
This is actually a national dilemma, Julia. Do you negotiate with hostages to bring every man or woman home? A lot of people feel that the state let them down on October 7th. Where was the army? Where was the police? And therefore, our basic obligation to our citizens is to do everything we can to bring them home. But let me tell you what has changed. And let me tell you why I don't think October 7th would happen again. And that is because there was national security consensus for many years was you pay Hamas off, you let them have Qatari money, you give them work permits, and you can buy off their quiet. You can buy off, but you can't do that when you have ideological jihadi killers. These people are not incentivized by quiet. They're not incentivized by prosperity, which is what Israel offered them. They don't want to build a state. They simply want to destroy the Israeli state. That's what it boils down to for them. And so what I think has changed in the mentality in Israel is that we have to make sure that Hamas do not rule Gaza. What that means, I don't know at this point. And let me just tell you something else, Julia. Netanyahu is a very smart operator. I think there's a lot in this deal that we don't know and that we don't see.
And perhaps a lot of promises being made by Trump.
Exactly,
I mean, he has been steadfast behind Israel in a way that Biden may have been behind the scenes with military aid, but actually some of his spoken words and Kamala Harris is really undermining Israel. But in terms of his appointees, Secretary of State, Defense Secretary, they are 100% not only pro-Israel, but we need to destroy Hamas. Now, we heard from Antony Blinken, the outgoing Secretary of State for Joe Biden's pick, who I think has actually been doing a really very impressive job in the Middle East. He seems to be like a serious figure, unlike Joe Biden, who apparently thinks that Hezbollah committed the 7th of October massacre. That's what he said in his speech yesterday, quite extraordinarily. But Blinken was saying, look, figures that Israeli have given out suggesting that some best part of 20,000 of those who've been killed in Gaza, of the claimed sort of 47-ish or whatever thousand it is. I mean, all those deaths of any innocent child we will all mourn for, but some 20,000 are actually Hamas fighters. I think it's a good thing that those people are not alive to cause more havoc and mayhem, not just for Israel, but for the Palestinian people. But Blinken said yesterday, they're just being replaced by and rebuilt again. Hamas is just as much a force as it was. Now, we know Hezbollah isn't. We know that Iran isn't. Is that crucially also what's changed, or is Hamas just able to with the aid money and the rebuilding, reconstruction money, they're just able to go in and do exactly the same again. Build up their weaponry, build up shore up their support among Palestinians, ready to fight again.
I think it's different this time for a number of reasons. I'm praying that part of the deal that we don't see is the commitment of the Americans to actually start the process of getting rid of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, Hamas is a proxy of the Islamic Republic of Iran, as is Hezbollah, as are the Houthis, and are the Shia militias in Iraq. But imagine if what we are going to be seeing this year is the West, democratic countries helping the Iranian people get rid of the very toxic, genocidal, the biggest exporter of terrorism regime that they have. Imagine this is part of the unspoken deal. And then we have a completely new reality, not just in Israel, but in the entire Middle East, because Hamas, without the help of the Iranians, are nothing. Hamas, with Israel sitting on the border with Egypt, where they brought in all of the weaponry they smuggled in from Egypt that was coming in from Iran. Without that, if you disarm them, then who are they? The question is, who rules Gaza the day after? And in my dream, we could use the Abraham Accords, the advancement of the Abraham Accords to countries like Saudi Arabia to actually create a positive enclave of Sunni moderate leadership, like is the UAE, like Bahrain, and like Saudi is becoming.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, people talk about moderate. There's moderate and there's moderate. Not quite as completely lunatic and extremist and violent. I mean, that's your best bet, isn't it? I mean, I'm sorry, but let's have a reality check about
Julia, the UAE and Saudi Arabia have banned Al Jazeera, and the UK hasn't. So let's put things where they are.
Well, yeah, I don't think that. Al Jazeera, yeah, I realise
the poison machine.
They are. Nevertheless, I think they've got some other problems in those countries, I have to say. But when you say who rules Gaza the day after, the big concern, of course, is, and people often talk about, you must separate Hamas, the terrorist organisation, just a little memo there to the BBC, and the Palestinian people living in Gaza. But the reality is that Hamas has had a lot of support. Now, they haven't had elections for, 20 years now in Gaza. But I mean, and it's how could we possibly tell from polling, to people when there's a man with a gun at the end of the street, know whether people are giving honest answers. It would appear that people in Gaza do support Hamas by and large. We also know the propaganda that children are being sold, in the books that they've had to read, often in schools run by UNRWA, amazingly, that a UN agency paid for by often our aid money, telling them, the highest achievement of a child in Gaza could be to put on a suicide vest, be a martyr and kill as many Jews as possible.
Exactly.
How do you overcome that? Because this peace deal doesn't change any of that.
It really just depends who rules Gaza after Hamas. And I don't think we're going to see any of that for the next few months. We need to get over this peace, this ceasefire. We need to get our hostages home, as many of them as possible. Like you said earlier, we don't even know who's alive and who's dead. They're talking about the first 33, only 23 being alive, and the cruelty of these mind games, that we don't know who's going to be walking through and who's going to be coming in a box. So at the moment, there's still many things up in the air. And you are quite right that Hamas is so entrenched into every part of civilian life in Gaza, and people are so indoctrinated that you can't imagine what it can be like.
Yeah.
But I really think that the minute the West decides that they're no longer supporting and they're no longer going to put up with giving money to a Palestinian leadership that pays people to kill Jews and pays schools to teach hatred and indoctrination, the minute the aid stops and the minute we can stop Iran from enriching their proxies, that is the beginning of the end for these proxies.
Well, we certainly hope so. Let's talk about what could happen, assuming this deal does actually go ahead, assuming we get the agreement from Hamas and from the Israeli government fully to this. On Sunday, now this is the final day of the Biden administration, the day before the Trump inauguration. You mentioned Trump in your first answer about how him basically saying, sort of hostage deal before I get into office or all hell's going to break out. In terms of what you're expecting to happen, do you expect there will actually be hostages released that first day? Because we're looking at only 3 hostages a week being released, and we don't even yet know exactly who is alive and who isn't. It'll be women and children. And again, we hope, I mean, certainly as the British-Israeli woman, 28-year-old Emily Damari. But also, I mean, I think for most of us, I think, the little, was it Kafir and Ariel, aged, I think 1 or 2 and 5 Bibas, and with their mother, Shiri, held captive. I mean, one would hope to God that they're still alive. But it's women and children and the elderly first. But, I mean, how sure are you that those people are actually still alive?
We're not sure at all. What they're saying here is that a majority of the first 33 hostages to be released are alive. And that doesn't give you a lot of confidence when it's coming from a genocidal terrorist group. And we don't even know if the Bibas family are alive because we've had absolutely no proof of life.
Yeah.
We're praying for all of them. And when you talk about humanitarian hostages, who isn't a humanitarian hostage at this point after 470 days in captivity, not seeing the light of day? And of course, then you have the families who have sons and the younger boys in the supposedly second phase saying, well, who's guaranteeing that my son is coming home? It's heartbreaking, but this is part of this psychological warfare. They're drip feeding us the hostages whilst we have to release murders back into society. And what else what else can a country do? What else can we do?
Yeah, oh no, but look, if it was my family member, I'd say release 1 million prisoners to get my child home. That's what you do as a mom, wouldn't you? But I do worry. Again, we've always said in the West, we don't negotiate with terrorists, we don't pay ransoms. This is effectively a negotiation with terrorists and paying a ransom to get your people home. I completely understand why. My worry is this just prepares the next. They have learned again and again and again, and this building, that not only does taking hostages innocent men, women, children, not only, and the games they've been playing, the videos, the taunting, it's disgusting behaviour from these. I mean, they're animals. Hamas terrorists are animals. But not only have they learned that taking hostages works for them, but like literally what they can get, not only in terms of trying to negotiate and getting what they want, getting their own terrorists out of prison, but also crucially the way they've been able to use innocent civilians in Gaza, innocent hostages as a negotiating tool to win support from, frankly, the useful idiots around the world, the kafir-wearing classes on university campuses, in our media, BBC, and frankly, in our government right now.
Julia, starving their own people, preventing their own people, selling at a premium the humanitarian aid the whole world is sending them and that Israel is facilitating. This is the type of people. I have a podcast. I interviewed a soldier recently who told me that he saw from a drone a Hamas terrorist killing a 5-year-old Palestinian boy who ran out of this hospital, the hospitals that they accuse us of attacking, where they're keeping their own people hostage. And one little boy ran off and he got killed. He got shot in the head point blank in front of his mother. These are the type of animals we're dealing with.
Well, this is true. I mean, this is true. Look, I really hope that this can be resolved. I hope to God that we do see those innocent hostages brought home, and I also hope that innocent people in Gaza do get to start a new life. I fear, alas, though, that this isn't going to go as well as many are hoping. Wish you the best, Fleur Hassan Nahum, Israeli Foreign Ministry Special Envoy. Benedict Spence, you've been listening to all of that. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are deeply sceptical about the longevity of this ceasefire. There isn't a world in which Hamas and Israel can coexist. Hamas is still the ruler of Gaza.
And is committed to the destruction of Israel.
Yeah, and to be honest, when your options are either that or, I don't know, the Palestinian Authority, which has sort of proved themselves wholly dysfunctional, unable to govern the West Bank particularly effectively, I'm not optimistic. I have to be honest. I understand that there is a desire to be seeing, for there to be progress, but ultimately, for as long as these organisations are the ones that are running the Palestinian territories, I don't see how we actually move on. And the problem is, for as long as the Palestinians don't recognise, A, that they have lost this conflict and that right now is probably territorially as good as it gets for them, then we're simply going to see Israel actually shunt further and further to the right.
Yeah, and Israel's going to take the West.
Well, as they recognise that actually that there is so much support for the Palestinian cause course, across the world that isn't being addressed properly. In Western nations, it's just been allowed to sort of fester and go unchecked. What will the average Israeli do? Will they think, oh, that's fine, they're all on our side? Or will they go, hang on, this is really still an existential thing for us. We can't guarantee the support of Western nations. And even though for the time being the United States will not countenance a threat to Israel, that doesn't mean that in 50, 60 years' time that won't change.
Or in 4 years' time. I mean, also, who knows, with Donald Trump, I think this is one of the few things he's been fairly consistent on. Again, this is not just an existential battle for Israel and for Jewish people against his forces. This is an existential battle being fought by them on our behalf, on behalf of Western civilization. These people don't just want, and again, and I'm sorry, it's not just Hamas, it's not just Hezbollah, it's not just Iranian mullahs. Large swathes of people in the Middle East sign up to this ideological, political Islamist thought. They don't just want every Jew on this planet, not just in Israel, every Jew on this planet to be slaughtered. They want every infidel, everyone who is not even just not Muslim, not their particular strand of Islam, to be killed. I'm sorry, this is an existential battle, and you don't negotiate with people like that.
You only have to look at what has been done to the Yazidis, to the Kurds, to the Armenians, to the Copts, to the Druze, to recognise you're only useful for the time being. Israel is very useful for the West. If it stops being useful, if that changes somehow, and the West does have history of anti-Semitism, let's not pretend that we've always been the good guys. That you only people who can guarantee your own security is yourself.
What I was going to find fascinating is, are we going to see yet another one of those pro-Palestinian solidarity marches on Saturday? Of course, they want to start and finish, outside a synagogue on a Saturday. I mean, because just coincidentally, of course,
classy people, aren't they?
Classy, exactly. You got your ceasefire. You don't have to be on the streets anymore. Oh, it wasn't about that, was it? There you are. 12:23 is the time. Love to hear your thoughts on this. Love to hear your thoughts also on the war zone in our A&E departments, people dying on trolleys in corridors without nurses having the time to even deal with it or even notice. Also, a lot of people calling in reaction to the story about that drill rapper who served time behind bars, 14 years minimum term for the murder of a 16-year-old schoolboy, Jimmy Mizzen. But now he's out trying to profit, becoming a drill rapper, celebrated by BBC One Extra for his drill rap, even though he's actually glorifying the crime he committed. We'll talk about that up next. Do give us a call, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Sleepy Joe Biden proved to everyone that he has what it takes to be president. So now we have a new victim to defeat, Kamala Harris, L-Y-I-N apostrophe. Take a look at what happened. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 12:27 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Benedict Spence still with me. Let's get some of your messages that you've been sending in about Israel and about the NHS, and we'll get to a call. I'm asking, is this a good deal and for who? Yasmin says, makes you wonder why the Biden administration couldn't stop this war earlier. We all know it's because Trump said there would be hell in the Middle East if the hostages weren't returned. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, if Biden had been stronger on this one, I mean, just really... And again... There's only one side to take if you're Western government, unless, of course, you're our Labour government. Peter says, bit late now that Israel has already flattened Gaza. Benefits the Zionists. I'm not sure how it benefits me, and I'm a Zionist, Peter. There we are. Daniel says, I wouldn't be surprised if Israel tried turning Gaza into a massive car park. They've completely flattened it. Why did they have to do that, though, Daniel? Was there a reason why they had to do that? Dave says it's a short-term ceasefire. It'll be broken by one side sooner rather than later. Mark says bad deal for Israel. They should finish the job once and for all. Brian says it's a heavy deal for to Israel, but they do love life and respect the dead, unlike the terrorists who play with life and love death. Kevin says it really depends on how many hostages are returned. Yeah, big factor there. Jay says I don't have much faith in Hamas releasing hostages. I pray I'm wrong. James says this is a brilliant example of Trump's leadership. He hasn't even started yet, and he's ended one war. Again, I don't think this is a peace deal. This is a temporary ceasefire. We'll see what happens. Regarding that Royal College of Nursing report about patients, being overwhelming A&E. And dead patients even lying undiscovered on trolleys, not being noticed. Your reaction to that? Jules has got in touch to say, no disrespect, but from my observations from recent visits to hospitals, A&E especially, the nurses are sitting on their phones in the observation area having a good old natter. It's not a generalised smear, it's just what I personally have observed, she says. Lee says, honestly, this is a mess. Dead patients undiscovered for hours. It's beyond a crisis. It's a national disgrace. The system's failing us, not the staff. Gary says lots of trainee nurses have passed their degree and are told there are no jobs as the NHS is using private nurses to take them on, and then there will be enough I can't even make Gary. We need more punctuation in that message and I can understand it. Roger says, which hospitals? How many? Why exactly are the staff not noticing? Too few of them? Or do they need corridor nurses? Or what? Well, yeah. We're just giving in to the idea we just have people in corridors. Sam says, waiting for people to blame Starmer for this instead of chronic mismanagement by Tories over 14 years. Yeah, except this is also happening in Wales, as one of our callers pointed out, and they've had a Labour administration running healthcare all these years. Tony says, tell them to stop walking around on their phones, then maybe they'd notice the people dying in front of their eyes. Lauren says, shameful, utterly shocking. I suspect elderly left to dehydrate and die. Management of these hospitals should be held personally responsible. Let's go to the phone lines. Ben is in Hertfordshire. A very good afternoon to you, Ben.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. Now, you want to talk about something we've just been talking about the last half hour, and that's this drill music and this rapper. He's been in jail for murder of a 16-year-old, Jimmy Mizzen, but he's out and about. He's being played on BBC on their BBC One Extra, urban music, celebrated, and he's a convicted murderer glorifying his own crimes. What did you want to say?
Well, I'm not too sure about that, but I will just say I'm a first-time caller, so be gentle with me.
Very brave.
But that said, I've got some insight into the young people of today.
Yeah.
To give you a bit of background, we run a alternative education facility for young people, primarily dealing with youngsters that are excluded from education, ranging in ages from about 8 to 17. most of all that have learning difficulties and do not fit into the mainstream agenda of education. So that said, at our facility, we provide a range of activities from cooking, music, sport, boxing, etc., to get these disenfranchised young people engaged with positive role models and a positive direction, give them the opportunity to do something constructive, creative, educational. And so I have, and I'm not claiming to have the answer here, but I do have what I think is a reasonable insight. So we get these young people up, they'll be in the studio, they're not confined to making any specific sort of music. You have to give them the creative freedom. You can't say, no, you can't do that. Like, you like this sort of music, drum and bass, whatever that may be. So you want them to have that creative opportunity. But that said, a large portion of them do aspire to making this sort of horrific and very negative sort of music. Now, in some cases, they have lived these experiences. In other cases, you've got just regular young people that are not involved in any of these activities, but yet they still aspire to talk about it because they think it's cool. It's cool. It's trendy, and for whatever else, some sort of kudos, which remains to be seen. That anyone outside of that drill box can plainly see this is not good stuff. But that said, if you historically go back into music, if you take different genres, you could go to the States, you could talk about gangster rap, NWA, etc.
Well, how people felt about rock and roll. I mean, but that's the thing. I don't have an issue. The point is, like, okay, I mean, I'd rather these kids were doing maths and English. It might do them more good when it comes to their daily lives, but apparently kids just have to be entertained and do what they want these days. But I understand you're dealing with the kids after they've already been failed, usually, by the way, by their parents before the school has failed them. They need a good role model because dad's not there. Don't they?
This is my next point. If you look at that, genre of music, and you take that as a general acid test of how the youth of today are, and in what a bad shape they are, and what a lack of opportunities they've got, and where their general mindset is, you could certainly say that it's not a good insight as to where the youth of today are.
No. I don't think they've got a lack of opportunities. I think there are plenty of opportunities for people to do the right thing. I just think a lot of these kids, and I see a lot of these kids both as victims and perpetrators. I mean, a lot of them, kids don't behave like that if they are happy and they've got, loving families. They don't. They just don't. So things have gone wrong. But I mean, okay, I don't want to ban. I'm not censoring music or any art form and everything. And actually, look at the lyrics. No, exactly. I wouldn't even want to. I mean, looking even the lyrics that this murderer has actually written, they're actually really clever lyrics. The rhymes, it's actually really clever. I wouldn't want to ban it. But should the BBC be allowing a convicted murderer to glorify his crime on taxpayers' dime?
Well, they banned the Keir Starmer Christmas song,
I know.
didn't they? So
that's what I mean.
That's all right.
I'm of the age, I remember when, they wouldn't play Relax by Frankie Goes to Hollywood, for goodness sake.
Well, this is it. I mean, just to go back to what I was saying, I think it's the general lack of discipline. Look at the state of the police. Look at all the crime that's being overlooked and that's not being... There's nothing being done about it. We're falling into this sort of area of general society where there's just zero what's given. And that's from the top. That's from the top.
Absolutely.
Down.
Ben,
these kids need good role models, positive relationships where they've broken down, like you say, at home, and all the rest of it. They're still entitled to have a life and try and get on in life as best they can.
I agree. Ben, such a great call. Thank you so much for calling, and keep up the great work. I mean, that's a tough gig. You're kind of replacing schools, families, everything, the community. Thank you very much indeed for getting in touch. Thank you for what you do. I'm going to take a quick break now. Up next, we are going to be talking about all things EU and immigration as well with Stephen Wolfe. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Me, Julia Hartley-Brewer, and Benedict Spencer with me. It's 12:38. Benedict, should I throw an idea at you?
I'd rather you didn't. I can't really think that far ahead.
What do you think of the idea of immigrants having to, if they want citizenship in our country, having to prove that they've lived an honest life and they'll be, a good contributor to our society? Do you think that's a mind-blowingly wild idea?
What an outrageous suggestion. There's borders shouldn't exist. Nationality is a concept. You should be able to do what you want. That's how I conduct my life. I do what I want.
And it's pretty much what everyone in the Labour Party, the Labour government think as well. Yes. Isn't it funny that this is actually a story. This is about Sweden. The migration minister has said you should feel proud to be a Swedish citizen. You only feel proud once you've made an effort. Immigrants in Sweden must prove they've lived an honest life before being granted citizenship under tighter new rules. They could be required to live in the country for 8 years instead of 5 and show they've not committed any crimes in Sweden or abroad and basically an honest way of life, so no unpaid debts, no criminal record and their conduct since they've arrived. They have to demonstrate also they are financially self-sufficient, so not relying on the state. What a wonderful idea. Well, let's talk about this with Stephen Wolfe. He's a former MEP. He's also director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. I mean, Stephen, what wild ideas to expect that people coming to live in your country, certainly those coming to get citizenship, should be net contributors, both, not just financially, but also in terms of, culturally and being a good member of society. I mean, wonders will never cease.
Oh, it is. Wonders will definitely never cease. And I thought I'd not see a European country actually start to talk common sense in the way that the Swedish have. And it does look like they have a pretty decent migration minister in John Forsell. He basically got something that we also believe is very much common sense, that citizenship must be earned and is not handed out immediately.
Yeah.
How shocking is that? We'd love the Labour Party to come out and say exactly the same.
I mean, I think one of the most shocking things about, probably one of the least shocking things about the horrific grooming and rape gangs story that's it's been around for 20 years and Elon Musk dragged up at New Year again, is that, talking about these dual British Pakistani nationals, so people not born in this country or people who are born in this country but do have access to another nationality. That, how many of these people, why were all these, kebab shop owners and taxi drivers living in Rochdale and Rotherham and Telford, why were they given British citizenship? What were they contributing? What benefit was there to British people from these men and their families being in this country? And I know, difficult question to ask, and clearly, obviously, Labour and the Lib Dems and Greens will shout racist at me now, but it's a perfectly legitimate question.
It is, and if you listen to those people who sit on the Migrant Advisory Committee, which oddly enough, this is totally a side issue there, they actually published their report from a year ago, only 2 days ago. So that's how much information we get about migration in this country. They would say a taxi driver and a kebab shop owner are net contributors to this country. But
selling a lot of kebabs.
Yeah, well, we'd have to. And I'd say that's very, very different to the story that we're looking at. And when you're looking at Sweden, their proposals are actually, again, I think, incredibly common sense. You have to contribute and have a system of society and values and language, which we all work together, John Forster says, that brings people from disparate countries together under those Swedish values. So you can't be a criminal. We're going to extend your time in Sweden from 5 to 8 years. You've got to be financially sound to be able to stay here. Yeah. You can't have backing out on your debts. And I think that's perfectly sensible. My interesting point here is whether now with the group of 7 countries that Sweden is now looking at as being to create a stronger immigration policy in the EU, is whether they'll start trying to put this across the EU.
Yeah, I mean, that would be fascinating because, I mean, certainly we are seeing many major countries in the EU sort of moving in that direction, realising the error of their ways. I mean, Denmark was perhaps the country that woke up the first and didn't allow the sort of mass uncontrolled migration, and they do not see some of the same problems some of these other countries have got. Let me also ask you about what is going on back here at home. Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, is making her first major speech of 2025. I think there's things going on in the rest of the world that perhaps will rather overshadow that. But apparently she is going to say later this afternoon that, the Tories have made mistakes, particularly over immigration. So, promising to cut immigration, control it, and then actually putting rocket boosters under it. Mistakes over net zero in terms of having a 2050 target and not really having a plan to how to deal with it. I mean, we're going to talk to a guest about that in a few moments, but I would argue you shouldn't have had the target in the first place. But also mistakes over Brexit. So delivering Brexit, but not really having a plan for how we would grow outside the EU. Just tackling the immigration side and the Brexit side, as someone who's a former MEP for the Brexit Party, what do you make of those? We haven't got the full text yet, but what do you make of what we're hearing, of what she's going to say?
Well, I like to see the fact that she's going to apologise deeply. I mean, because it certainly is something that we have noted. You and I both campaigned extensively for ourselves to leave the European Union, to create the opportunities that I still believe are there for us to expand our economy, control migration, reduce regulations, opportunities for our businesses to expand, all of that. And yet it wasn't carried through by the Conservative government. Boris Johnson desperately failed on immigration. He's now actually creates more immigration in this country than Tony Blair, if you look at the statistics. And that's not something that he will have in his political history.
No, I mean, more than 1 million people net every year coming to this country under Boris Johnson. Yeah. Legally handed visas. Apparently a complete surprise to Number 10 and the Home Office. Utter surprise after they handed out the visas.
Yeah, I'm stunned. That's the same sort of sentiment and statements that Tony Blair has made consistently, that, yes, we were told that only 8,000 to 10,000 people would come from the European bloc when we opened it to the AA. Oh, wasn't it shocking that hundreds of thousands came very, very quickly?
It's almost like they weren't warned about it. Oh, they were, of course, by Migration Watch UK, but there we are. But this is the thing. I mean, it's all very well apologising. Do you think anyone will ever trust the Tories again on that?
I think this is where the real problem lies, Suman, is that you have Robert Jenrick now, who is becoming incredibly strong on the issues of deportation of those who are illegal immigrants into the country. He's been really strong on the sexual exploitation gangs, which I think we should have a new investigation into that, a proper investigation into that area. So he's trying to bolster that at the back. The question of whether the public will still believe them after they've seen the big three issues that you talked about failed, and whether her apology is enough, I just don't think it's there at the moment.
No.
And I think Reform would have to make some pretty big mistakes for them to actually allow people who moved from the Conservative to Reform to go back again.
Yeah,
this is a long journey.
Certainly not ready there, yeah. And in terms of Brexit, I mean, saying, we should have prepared more for it. But, again, I think everyone does forget, and God, the Ramonas love mentioning this, what's happened to the economy and inflation and things like that. Yeah, small matter of lockdown, by the way. Small matter of lockdown that happened at the same time across the nation and across the world. But also, what do you make of the Liberal Democrat leader, Ed Davey? It's been billed as his first major speech of the year. I'm not entirely sure that the Liberal Democrat leader makes major speeches, but I'm biased. But he says that the UK must rejoin the EU customs union. That's where our future lies. What do you say to that?
Well, I think Ed is actually trying to channel Limahl from the 1980s with Never Ending Story. Perhaps he wants to sing...
What a cultural reference.
Yeah, maybe he wants to call it Never Ending Rejoiner, because if you only have to look across the continent, I think the EU is beginning to recognise they're facing an economic apocalypse, which includes stagnation, inflation, weak productivity, weak competitiveness. Only 4 of the top 50 tech companies in the world are from the EU.
Yeah.
None of the 15 best electric vehicles are from the EU. If he wants us to join that failing organisation and go back, it will only make our nation decline even more quickly.
It is fascinating. He says we should have weaker links with America. I mean, I don't think the man can read a spreadsheet. Actually, I don't think Rachel from Accounts can either, but there we are. Stephen Wolfe, great to talk to you, as always, former MEP, Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. Benedict Spence, but I think just come in particularly on the issue of Brexit and customs union and all of that.
It just shows, though, the complete lack of imagination that our political elites actually have, is that they think the answer is to go back and fall in behind the bloc. that isn't succeeding. We should have taken the opportunity, we still can, to actually try to get out ahead of these people, to be the ones dragging them forward by competition. Because, yes, we are each other's largest trading partners. Fine. That we're not going to sever all ties. But by setting our own example of what can be achieved outside of the bloc, we can drag the rest of Europe in our slipstream. Instead, what we want to do is chain ourselves. I think we could. What we want to do instead is chain ourselves to the back of the European Union, because we will get a worse deal than we had when we were there.
Oh, and we'd never go back in.
And
we'd never go back in. The British people wouldn't accept it.
I'll tell you what, even if we just had closer alignment with them, it would be bad. But either way, Europe is going to end up being dragged in America's slipstream because that is its future. It has decided it doesn't want to be a live player. It doesn't want to be a big player on the world stage. It just wants to sit there. So America will drag it kicking and screaming in one direction, or China will in the other. It's up to it. And we will be behind them. That's the answer that Ed Davey's giving us.
Absolutely. Benedict Spence, thank you very much. Coming up, we could take a quick break. Then we're going to be talking to the brilliant Rupert Darwell, the author of Green Tyranny, about Ed Miliband admitting that heat pumps, the ones that don't work, by the way, may never be cheaper than gas boilers. Yeah, I've been pointing that out for quite some time. Nice to know you're listening, Ed. That's up next. This is Talk.
I wouldn't be surprised if they're fiddling the figures at the moment anyway to make them look better than they are.
Well, that's what I think is going on with the previous month's revisions, because if you revise the previous months downwards, that makes the current numbers a little bit smaller. So that is, if it's a negative number, and that is what I think is going on here. And we've got a government, of course, that came in saying that they were going to elected on stability and growth. Well, we've had instability in the finance markets and the currency markets, and we've got no growth whatsoever.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. This is Talk Home of Common Sense. 12:52 is the time. Benedict Spence still with me, and I'm sure, can't wait to get your comments on what our next story is. Rupert Darwell joins us to discuss, as author of Green Tyranny, the admission from the net zero or Energy Security Minister Ed Miliband, who's admitted that heat pumps, which currently cost around 10 grand, that's just the actual heat pump, forget all the extra work involved, may never actually be cheaper than gas boilers, currently costing around 3 grand, despite Labour sneaking a boiler tax through Parliament. Rupert, I mean, this isn't a revelation to anyone paying attention, is it? Of course, these things are never going to be cheaper to buy or to install. There's also the small point, which doesn't like to mention, they don't actually work very well either, do they?
Well, particularly in Britain's ageing and drafty housing stock, that's absolutely right. I mean, fundamentally, electricity is a more expensive way to heat your home than burning natural gas. I mean, it's really as simple as that.
I mean, you and your silly facts. I mean, that'll never catch on. But the Energy Secretary, he's confirmed that the government is not planning to introduce a future ban on gas boilers. That was something, by the way, the Tories were going to bring in, and then they sort of reneged a bit on it. But the Labour said they were going to go ahead with that, and the scheme was going to come in, which will come into force in April, means boiler manufacturers will be fined if they fail to sell enough heat pumps, similar to what's been going on in the electric car market. But they're not going to ban these gas boilers, and it's just going to be a requirement, I believe, for new builds to have heat pumps. But again, heat pumps work really well in some of the Nordic countries where they're the norm, where you've got a lot more space, fewer people, a lot more space. Houses are built with incredible insulation to cope with those incredibly cold, snowy winters, and the heat pumps work very well in those scenarios. But that's pretty much, 1% of our housing stock, which is why they don't work here.
And the other thing is they have, when the temperature falls in the Nordic countries, the temperature just stays low for much longer. We have much more variable outside temperatures, which also makes life more difficult. But I think the thing I'm very cynical about what Ed Miliband's saying.
Cynical about Ed Miliband? No.
Well, what they're going to do, Julia, is drive up the cost of natural gas. That's how they'll get people to switch. Because under the net zero plan, what you'll have is the government has carbon emissions allowances, and it reduces the number of those allowances, which drives up the price. So we're going to have vertiginously expensive natural gas.
So people will say, well, it'd be cheaper for me to do it. That's what they've done that with fuel duty. People thought it was cheaper to get an electric car. And of course, as soon as then people move from diesel and petrol cars to electric cars, they then make sure that price goes up. But here's the thing: we've already got the highest electricity prices pretty much in the world. Domestically, for domestic use, electricity is 3 times the sort of the average in most countries. In terms of businesses, it's 5 times. What a surprise. People can't afford to run businesses and manufacture in this country. Certainly not, the AI, the future that the Prime Minister seems to magically think we're going to have with those costs. So their solution to all of that is that we just make gas more expensive.
That's absolutely correct. And they also talk about energy efficiency. And how do they get energy efficiency? How do they make energy efficiency pay? It's by pushing up the cost of energy. So I think one has to be... The one thing that is for the birds was Ed Miliband's and Keir Starmer's pledge of cutting energy bills by £300 a year. As long as we remain on this court, on the net zero escalator, energy costs are just going to go up and up. And
again, you can't run a successful company. You can't grow 0.1% growth in GDP in the last quarter. I mean, well done, everybody. We're not in recession. I mean, it's pathetic. But it's going to get worse before it gets better, certainly. I've always thought the Labour are going to end up dropping below these targets the way that as we got closer and closer, the Tories did. I'm not sure they're sensible enough to do that, which is a very, very big worry. And of course, we've had Kemi Badenoch saying that Tories have made errors on all of these things, but and things like net zero, but they didn't have a plan in place to reach those targets. But of course, it's the target that's the problem, not everything else.
Yeah, I think Kemi Badenoch saying she's a net zero skeptic it doesn't really wash anymore. I mean, you basically have to say net zero was a mistake, and you have to say we need a new policy. We need energy realism. We've got to put energy affordability and energy security right at the centre of what we're going to achieve.
Used to be a basic fundamental until everyone went insane. Thank you for your sanity, Rupert Darwell, author of Green Tyranny. Very quick word from Benedict Spence on this.
I don't know why you criticise me for being so negative when this is our government. These are the policies that we have to sit with. Why should I be anything other than negative, frankly?
You're one of those young folk trying to make a future. But again, I can understand people going, I'm off to America or somewhere. By the way, breaking news. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has just announced a plan. Is going to announce a plan to implement local inquiries into grooming gangs. She's going to make a statement to the House of Commons later. Of course, we've had calls for a national public inquiry. I wonder whether a local inquiry is really going to... We've had them in Rotherham and in Rochdale, but I think a lot of people have said that's just not going to be far enough to join the dots. But Ian Collins has just joined us. Ian, what do you make of that?
Well, it is a reverse ferret, isn't it, from the government? No doubt about it. And they've just sort of had to find a way to word it that sounded as if they hadn't changed their mind.
And that's got a busy news
day. Sort of do it, and also do it on a local level. And I think people will join the dots, though. I think everybody else will join the dots.
Rotherham MP Sarah Champion, she had called for local inquiries to report back to the central government. She's tweeted that it looks like the government is accepting my 5-point plan to prevent child abuse. I think the key point of a national public inquiry with people giving evidence under oath was the crucial aspect about what Kemi Badenoch talked about, joining the dots. I'm not sure that's going to fly with an awful lot of...
And also, what does it look like? You know, who heads it up?
But given it is local councillors and local police chiefs and such who've done the cover-up.
Marking your own homework. That's the last thing.
Well, I'm sure people will be interested to know about that later this afternoon. What else are you talking about?
We're going to talk about the NHS. I know you've touched on this as well. It's a question, you and I have been doing this job for a long time.
All right.
And how many times have we asked the question, how do we save the NHS? How do we do it? What's gone wrong in the NHS? It's gone on for a long, long time. And, people have some reasonable ideas.
I think people are changing. I think there is a recognition. Even when you get like Wes Streeting, I don't think it's going to do much about it, but saying, look, there's a problem, we need to reform it.
Yeah, but saying it and doing it